The alleys of Cairo were alive with secrets. By day, the markets overflowed with spices, silks, and the cries of merchants, but by night the city changed its face. Behind plain wooden doors, hidden in twisting streets no map dared record, men and women gathered in silence. The air inside was thick, sweet, smoky, and intoxicating. Laughter melted into whispers, coins into hands, and power into smoke. Here, truth was always hidden, and a single breath could carry both dreams and ruin. Chapter 1. The smoke behind the doors. The lanterns flickered against the mud-brick walls as the sun dipped behind the minarets of Cairo. Evening fell like a velvet curtain, and with it came a silence different from the day. The crowded markets thinned, shopkeepers bolted their wooden stalls, and the city exhaled after hours of noise. Yet in certain streets, footsteps quickened instead of slowing, for night was not the end, it was the beginning. A narrow lane near Bab al-Zuwaylah smelled faintly of mint and smoke. To a passerby, it looked like any other street, lined with aging walls and uneven stones, but those who knew its secrets paused at an unmarked door, its wood darkened by years of smoke and hands pressing against it. No signs hung above it, no symbols marked it, only silence and the faint hum of life on the other side. Inside, the room was dim, its ceiling low, its corners hidden in shadow. Rugs spread across the floor, worn thin by decades of use. Cushions lined the walls, and men sat cross-legged, their robes pooling around them. The air was hazy, clouded by smoke that curled slowly toward the ceiling. Pipes passed from hand to hand, glowing softly with embers, their tips stained by years of lips pressing against them. The sound inside was muted, an occasional cough, the clink of coins, the shuffle of slippers on the rugs. But underneath it all was something stronger, the sense of being hidden, of stepping outside the laws of the world, beyond those doors. A man could be anyone here, a scholar, a thief, a beggar, or a prince. The smoke did not care. In one corner, a tall man with a scar across his cheek leaned closer to another, whispering words too low to catch. In another, two merchants shared a laugh, their voices already slurred by the thick haze. Near the entrance, an old man sat alone, his pipe balanced in his wrinkled hand, his eyes half closed as if watching a dream unfold. No one spoke too loudly. The walls had ears, and Cairo had a way of punishing those who forgot this. But still, people came. They came for the warmth of the pipe, for the relief it carried after days of toil, for the chance to forget debts, wars, and betrayals. Some came for trade, not of goods, but of secrets, secrets worth more than gold. On this particular night, as the lamps burned low and the smoke hung heavy, the door opened again. A figure slipped in quietly, cloaked in dust from the road. His eyes darted across the room, lingering not on the cushions, not on the pipes, but on the men who filled the haze with whispers. He was a stranger here, but already the smoke was pulling him into its world, wrapping him in silence, inviting him to listen. And in Cairo, listening was always the beginning of danger. The great gate of Bab al-Zuwaylah stood like a sentinel at Cairo's southern edge, its twin towers catching the last hues of twilight. By day, its archway was alive with merchants shouting their prices, children darting through the crowd, and guards leaning lazily against the stone walls. But when night came, the gate took on another face, a darker one. Shadows lengthened, and travellers who passed beneath its arch were marked, for Cairo never forgot a stranger. On this evening, a man emerged from the gate, his steps steady but his eyes restless. Dust clung to his cloak, and the leather of his boots bore the wear of many miles. He carried no servant, no companion, only a small satchel strapped across his chest. His beard was trimmed close, his hair dark and tangled, and his skin, though bronzed by travel, hinted at a birth outside Egypt. He paused near a stall where a woman sold figs, her basket half empty in the fading light. The woman studied him as he handed her a coin, too shiny, too foreign. She took it anyway, slipping it quickly into her apron. Strangers with foreign coins were not rare in Cairo, but this one carried something different. A stillness in his posture, a sharpness in his eyes, as if every shadow was a threat and every whisper a secret meant for him. The stranger made his way down the winding street, past the smell of roasting lamb and the sound of a musing calling the last prayer of the day. Yet his pace slowed when he reached a narrow alley, one that bent sharply between high walls and ended in silence. He stood there for a moment, watching, as though the stones themselves might speak, and then, as if led by instinct, or by memory, he stepped into the alley. The door was there, the same plain slab of wood that others had slipped through earlier. For a breath he hesitated. His hand lingered over the iron latch, his eyes narrowing at the faint wisp of smoke escaping through a crack. Then, with the certainty of someone who had already decided his fate, he pushed it open. Inside, the haze welcomed him like an old friend. The room was the same as before. Rugs, cushions, men lost in smoke. Yet when he entered, the hum of voices dimmed ever so slightly. Cairo's hidden dens had rules unspoken but understood. Every stranger was measured, weighed by eyes before he was accepted. The stranger moved without haste, lowering himself onto a cushion near the wall. A boy no older than 12 appeared at his side, carrying a clay pipe freshly packed with greenish-brown hashish. The boy offered it without a word, and the stranger accepted, bringing the pipe to his lips. He inhaled slowly, the ember glowing red, then exhaled a thin stream of smoke that curled upward into the haze. For a moment, silence surrounded him. Then the room resumed its rhythm. Whispers, laughter, the shuffle of coins. The stranger leaned back, his eyes half closed, but he was not lost in the smoke like the others. He was listening. From the far corner, the old man with the wrinkled hands watched him. His pipe rested lazily on his knee, but his gaze was sharp, too sharp for a man half asleep. He knew the look of wanderers, of thieves, of lost souls, seeking escape in smoke. But this one, carried a different weight. He was not here to forget. He was here to remember something, or to find it. And in Cairo's hidden lounges, those who came searching rarely found what they expected. The night in Cairo never truly slept. Even when the markets quieted and the lamps burned low, the city breathed through its narrow veins. Alleys so tight that two men could not walk side by side. Corridors where shadows seemed thicker than stone. It was in these alleys that the city's secrets moved, carried not in caravans but in whispers. The stranger left the smoke-filled den close to midnight. His steps were measured, his cloak drawn tighter against the cool air. Behind him, the laughter of men still echoed faintly, muffled by walls, dissolving into silence as he entered the crooked lane. The haze of hashish clung to him, though he had smoked little. He wanted his head clear. The street was empty, yet not entirely. Cairo's silence was never without an audience. Somewhere above, a shutter creaked. In the corner, a cat darted past, startled by his shadow. But it was the footsteps, faint, too deliberate, that betrayed the presence of someone following. He slowed, letting the rhythm of his steps soften. At a turn in the alley, he stopped altogether, resting his hand on the stone wall. A few heartbeats later, a figure emerged, a man in a dark robe, face half hidden by a scarf. He did not come close, not yet. Instead, he lingered as though waiting for permission to speak. "You don't walk like a cairn," the man said at last, his voice low, as if afraid of being carried by the night. The stranger turned, his face calm but his eyes sharp. "And you don't follow like a friend." A tense silence stretched between them. The robed man stepped forward, his sandals whispering against the stones. His eyes darted once to the stranger's satchel, then back to his face. And not many new faces enter those doors. Fewer still leave so soon. "You're searching for something." "I'm searching for air," the stranger replied, his tone cool, though his hand brushed the edge of his cloak where the weight of a knife pressed against his ribs. The man's lips curled beneath the scarf, neither a smile nor a threat, but something in between. Air. He leaned closer, lowering his voice to a whisper. "Then you've chosen the wrong streets. Here, only smoke survives, and smoke hides more than it shows." The stranger did not answer. His silence was heavier than words. He simply watched, waiting. The robed man's gaze shifted again to the satchel, his curiosity sharpening. "They'll ask about you," he said. "Men inside think you're a traveller. Some think you're a spy. Me?" He paused, lowering his voice even more. "I think you're trouble. And Cairo has enough of that already. The stranger let the words linger, then finally spoke, his voice steady. "If you think I am trouble, you should stop walking in my shadow." The alley grew colder in that moment, the silence so deep it seemed the stones themselves were listening. Then, just as suddenly, the robed man chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "Perhaps you're right, but remember this, foreigner. Every whisper in Cairo is heard by someone, and the wrong whisper can drown a man in smoke before he takes his next breath." With that, he stepped back into the dark, his form vanishing into the folds of the alley as if he had never been there. Only the faint scrape of sandals on stone marked his retreat. The stranger stood for a while, listening to the silence that followed. His heart was steady, but his mind sharpened. This was no city of simple pleasures. The hashish dens were not merely escapes, they were webs. And now he was caught in them. He pulled his cloak tighter and continued down the alley, the whispers of Cairo already curling around him like smoke. The lounge was quieter than usual the following night. The smoke still clung to the air, the pipe still glowed faintly in the dim light, but there was a strange order to it all, as though the place itself waited for something or someone. The stranger entered with the same calm steps as before, his cloak hiding the dust of travel. Men glanced at him, some curious, some suspicious, but none dared question his presence. The hush of the room was not for him, it was for the man who was yet to arrive. They called him many things. They called him many things. To the guards of Cairo, he was no more than a rumour. To the merchants, he was a whisper behind a deal. To the poor, he was a shadow who offered escape for a coin. But here, inside the smoke-filled walls, he was Al-Sayed, the master. He entered without announcement. The door creaked open, and a tall figure appeared, draped in a robe of deep indigo, its edges embroidered with threads of gold that caught the light of the lamps. His beard was trimmed, his eyes dark and sharp as a falcon's. Rings adorned his fingers, but none glittered louder than the silence that followed his steps. Men shifted aside to make room. Even the old one in the corner straightened, his pipe lowering to his lap in quiet respect. The boy with the clay pipes bowed his head. The master did not demand silence. Silence was his companion, trailing him like a shadow. He walked to the farthest corner of the room, where a wide cushion awaited him. Sitting with the grace of someone who knew he was watched, he leaned back against the wall. Only then did the air seem to release its breath, as if the whole room had been holding it. The stranger's eyes met his. For a moment, nothing was said. Pipes passed between hands, the glow of embers lit the haze, but in that silence, the lounge became a battlefield. The stranger did not look away. The master's lips curved into the faintest smile. "A traveller," he said at last, his voice smooth, commanding, carrying the weight of someone used to being obeyed. Or perhaps not, the stranger exhaled slowly, though he had not smoked. Perhaps both. A few men chuckled nervously, their laughter fading quickly when the master raised a hand. His gaze sharpened. "You carry yourself as one who listens. Yet men who only listen are rarely harmless." The stranger leaned forward, his cloak slipping slightly to reveal the edge of his satchel. "Narmless men do not survive Cairo." The master's eyes gleamed at the reply, as if he had been waiting for it. He gestured to the boy, who quickly prepared a long, slender pipe, its bowl filled with the finest blend reserved for chosen guests. The boy offered it to the stranger first. "May gift," the master said. "Not of smoke but of trust. To refuse is to insult. To accept is to enter." The stranger took the pipe, inhaled deeply, and let the smoke drift upward in a slow, steady stream. Around him, men watched closely, waiting for the master's reaction. The master leaned back, his smile growing faintly. "Good. Then you may sit here, close to me. Not many strangers earn such a seat, and fewer still survive it." The stranger moved, seating himself across from the master. The smoke thickened between them, a veil, a weapon, a bridge. The night stretched long, the pipes passed endlessly, and beneath the haze of hashish words began to weave, careful, dangerous words that would decide whether this meeting was fortune or doom. For in Cairo, no man met the hashish master without leaving a mark on his soul. The smoke in the lounge was thicker that night, almost alive, curling around faces and drifting into whispers. It did not merely cloud the air, it carried the weight of unspoken bargains. Every puff, every ember, every shared pipe was more than a ritual of pleasure. It was a transaction. The stranger sat near the master, close enough to hear words that others could not. He had watched carefully the night before, but tonight he listened differently. He began to see what was hidden beneath the haze. A merchant in fine robes leaned forward, his pipe glowing faintly. He exhaled slowly, letting the smoke wrap his words. 2 ships arrived from Alexandria. Coffee, spices, and something rarer. The customs men were paid. The crates are safe. The master nodded once, almost lazily. He did not ask questions. He did not need to. The smoke between them was enough of a contract. Another man, older, with the look of a scribe, passed his pipe before speaking. "A guard at the palace speaks too freely. He drinks, and when he drinks, his tongue loosens. I can silence him for the right price." The master raised a hand, and the boy set down a small pouch of coins beside the man's cushion. The scribe bowed his head, inhaled deeply, and the matter was sealed. The stranger realized then that this was no ordinary den. The smoke was not just for dreams or forgetting. It was the veil under which Cairo's hidden deals were struck. Secrets moved here like currency, exchanged as freely as the pipes. Merchants, thieves, informants, even men of the Sultan's court, each had a place here. Each trusted the smoke to cloak their words. The master finally turned to the stranger. His eyes gleamed, sharp, unblinking. "Oh, do you see now?" he asked softly, so only he could hear. "Oh, men think they pay with coins. Think they pay with coins. But the true price is always whispered. Here, a secret is worth more than gold, more than land, more than blood." The stranger did not answer at once. He let the silence stretch, let the smoke wrap around his thoughts. At last he leaned closer. "And if a man comes with no secret to sell?" The master's smile was slow, dangerous. "Then he becomes the secret." Around them, the lounge shifted, men murmuring, coins sliding into hands, promises sealed with smoke. The stranger watched carefully, his mind weighing every detail. This was not the Cairo he had been told about. This was the true city, where power did not sit in palaces, but in rooms like this, rooms where smoke was currency, and silence was a weapon sharper than any blade. He inhaled again, the bitter sweetness filling his chest. He knew then that his journey had only begun. To survive here, he would have to play the game. And in this game, one careless breath could cost him everything. The call to dawn prayer echoed across Cairo, but inside the hidden lounge, time obeyed no musing. The smoke was still thick, the embers still glowed, and men still murmured their truths into the haze. Yet this night carried a weight unlike the others. The stranger felt it the moment he entered. The shift in silence, the cautious eyes, the way even the master's posture carried a sharper edge. A man had arrived, unlike the merchants and thieves who usually filled the cushions. His robe was finer, the silk dyed a deep crimson, his turban perfectly wound. A jewelled dagger rested at his side, not hidden but displayed, a reminder that his presence carried both wealth and power. 2 guards stood by the door, their eyes scanning every corner of the room. Whispers rippled through the smoke. "He serves the palace. He is close to the Sultan's council. Why is he here?" The master greeted him with a slight bow of the head, not of submission, but of recognition. Few men could command such courtesy in this room. The official sat without waiting to be invited. A pipe was placed before him, and he inhaled deeply, exhaling a stream of smoke that glowed faintly in the lamplight. "The Sultan grows restless," he said at last, his voice carrying easily through the haze. "The city whispers too much. The city whispers too much. Too many tongues wag in the markets, too many men gather in shadowed rooms." He asks, "Are these whispers born from smoke or from treachery?" The lounge grew still. Men lowered their eyes, pretending to lose themselves in the clouds curling above them. But the stranger saw how their hands tightened on their pipes, how our knees settled into the cushions like a second smoke. The master's smile never faltered. "Whispers are like rivers," he replied calmly. "They flow where they will. No man can damn them. But sometimes," he leaned back, letting his pipe glow, "a river can be guided, redirected, made to serve." The official studied him, his eyes sharp, weighing each word. "The Sultan will not tolerate rivers that flood his palace, and he should not," the master said smoothly. "Which is why he can trust that this river," he gestured lightly to the smoke, "does not flow against him." It was then that the official's gaze swept across the room and landed on the stranger. Their eyes met, and the stranger felt the weight of scrutiny, cold, calculating, dangerous. "Who is he?" the official asked. The master's answer came without hesitation. "A traveller, harmless." His tone was casual, but the stranger heard the unspoken warning beneath it. Harmless, for now. The official's eyes lingered a moment longer, then shifted back. "The Sultan listens to every whisper," he said quietly. "He does not forgive those who mistake smoke for shelter." He rose, his guards moving with him. Without another word, he left, his crimson robe vanishing into the night. Only after the door closed did the room release its breath. Men spoke again, softer than before. The stranger leaned forward, his voice low. "The Sultan's hand reaches even here." The master met his gaze, his smile thin and knowing. In Cairo, every shadow belongs to him, even the smoke. The stranger felt it then. The danger he had stepped into was far greater than the haze of hashish and the whispers of merchants. He was no longer in a den of escape. He was in a web spun so close to the palace that one wrong step could place him directly in the Sultan's shadow. The night was heavy with silence. The lounge had emptied earlier than usual, as though the men inside had sensed an invisible tension pressing against the walls. Only a few remained, their shadows long against the dim light, their smoke curling lazily toward the rafters. The stranger sat with his back to the wall, watching. The master had already withdrawn into a private chamber, leaving the lounge under the care of his attendants. Yet the stranger's instincts told him the night was far from finished. Cairo's dangers did not sleep, and smoke was never just smoke. Across from him sat a man he had seen often these past nights. Not old, not young, perhaps in his middle years, with a trimmed beard and a scar running down his left arm. The man was called Khalaf, a frequent visitor, always with a pipe in hand and always with a story on his tongue. He had spoken to the stranger before, casual words, nothing more than the kind of talk men shared in smoke. Tonight, though, Khalaf's eyes carried something sharper. He leaned forward, his pipe glowing faintly. "You carry yourself strangely, traveller," he said, his voice soft but steady. Steady's voice soft but steady. "And not like a merchant, not like a thief, and certainly not like a man here only for smoke." The stranger did not reply. He inhaled from his own pipe, letting the smoke cloud his face before exhaling slowly. Silence was sometimes safer than speech, but Khalaf pressed on. "I've seen men like you before, ma. Men who watch more than they speak, men who listen too carefully. You think no one notices, but smoke reveals what silence hides." The stranger's eyes flickered briefly toward him, then away. Still, he said nothing. Khalaf's smile was humourless. He tapped the pipe against the edge of his cushion, the embers flaring. "Do you know what they say about you, traveller? That you are not here for smoke, nor for company. That you carry something the master himself may want." The stranger finally spoke, his tone calm, steady. "And what do you believe?" Khalaf leaned closer, his whisper cutting through the haze. "I believe secrets are worth more than gold, and yours may be worth enough to buy me a place at the master's side." The stranger's jaw tightened, though his expression betrayed nothing. He felt the shift now, the trap closing in, not with blades or chains, but with words. Khalaf smiled faintly, raising the pipe to his lips. He inhaled, then exhaled a long stream of smoke, letting it drift between them like a veil. "I could speak your name. I could tell them what I've heard, that you are not simply a traveller, that you carry letters from the West, that the Sultan himself would pay dearly to see what lies in your satchel." The words struck like a hidden dagger. The stranger's hand brushed against his cloak, where the satchel rested against his chest. He had guarded it carefully through deserts, through markets, through nights of watching shadows. And now, here, in this smoke-filled den, the threat of betrayal hung heavy. Khalaf leaned back, his tone almost playful. "But perhaps I won't speak, if a man knows how to make friendship worth my silence." The stranger studied him, the smoke swirling between them, each man's face half hidden. He knew Cairo's game now. Trust was currency, betrayal was cheaper, and silence was never free. And in that moment, as the embers glowed red and the haze thickened, the stranger understood. His first enemy in Cairo was not the Sultan, nor the master, but the man who shared his pipe. The master's lounge was only one doorway into Cairo's underworld. Behind its walls men whispered, bargained and betrayed. But the smoke that curled through those chambers did not rise from nothing. Someone had to supply it, someone powerful enough to keep the flow unbroken, someone clever enough to remain unseen while his wealth spread like roots beneath the city. They called him the Merchant of Dreams. No sign bore his name, no guards shouted his titles, yet every den from Bab al-Zuwayla to the shores of the Nile owed him their survival. His caravans slipped through deserts, his ships crossed from Alexandria's harbours, his men carried crates through alleys before dawn. Where others traded in coffee or silk, he dealt in something far more precious, escape. Hashish was his coin, and he minted it by the chestful. The stranger first heard his name whispered in fragments. Merchants who grew suddenly rich, guards who turned blind for the right bribe, even scribes who knew palace secrets, all spoke of him with a mix of fear and awe. But no one claimed to have seen him directly, until one night the master himself summoned the stranger. The lounge was quieter than usual, the smoke thinner. Only the master, a handful of trusted men, and the stranger remained. The master leaned forward, his eyes gleaming in the lamplight. "You have listened well," he said. "But tonight you will see what few men are allowed to see. The river of smoke has one source, and if you wish to understand Cairo, you must meet the man who commands it." The stranger followed him through a hidden passage at the back of the lounge. They walked through twisting corridors, past locked doors and silent guards, until the sound of the city faded and a vast chamber opened before them. It was unlike the den's shadowed rooms. Here, lamps burned brightly, illuminating stacked crates, sealed jars, and bolts of fine cloth concealing their true cargo. The air was thick with the scent of resin and herbs. Men moved silently, loading and unloading, their faces hidden beneath scarves. At the centre, seated upon a wide cushion raised slightly above the floor, was a man draped in flowing white robes. His beard was long, his eyes dark, and his hands heavy with rings. Yet it was not his appearance that commanded attention. It was the stillness around him, the sense that the entire chamber bent itself to his will. The master bowed his head slightly. Effendi, the traveller I spoke of, the man in white, the merchant of dreams, lifted his gaze to the stranger. For a long moment, neither spoke. The air seemed heavier here, not with smoke, but with power. At last, the merchant spoke, his voice smooth, almost hypnotic. "Every man who enters my city breathes my smoke, whether he knows it or not. You have wandered its alleys, sat in its dens, listened to its whispers. But tell me, traveller, did you come seeking smoke or secrets?" The stranger held his gaze, his voice calm. Sometimes they are the same thing." The merchant's lips curved into the faintest smile. "Good, then you may sit." Few men are offered this seat, and fewer still survive what it costs them. The crates shifted, the men kept working, and the stranger realized the truth. Cairo's hidden empire did not belong to the Sultan, nor even to the master. It belonged to the man before him, the merchant of dreams, the unseen king who ruled with pipes instead of swords, with smoke instead of armies, and now the stranger had stepped into his court. The merchant of dreams ruled with smoke, but even he knew that not every secret could be bought with coins or hashish. Some truths slipped only from lips softened by desire, coaxed out in chambers where men let their guard fall, believing themselves safe in beauty's embrace. For that, Cairo had her, the woman whispered about in every lounge, feared as much as she was desired. They called her Layla al-Zara, the courtesan of Cairo. She was not found in the markets, nor in the streets, nor even in the Sultan's court, though many claimed she belonged there. Her world existed in silk-draped rooms where lamps glowed soft and wine spilled freely. Men said she could make a vizier confess his sins with a single smile, or make a thief swear loyalty with the brush of her hand. Some swore she was only a courtesan, others whispered she was an agent, a spy whose beauty was sharper than any blade. The stranger first saw her in the merchant's chamber. The crates and workers had been dismissed for the night, and only a select circle remained. She entered not with noise, but with presence, her steps light against the stone floor, her veil a thin fabric that revealed just enough to make imagination more dangerous than truth. Her eyes, lined with kohl, were not the eyes of a woman meant only for pleasure. They were eyes that studied, measured, stripped away masks. "Layla," the merchant said, his tone almost reverent, "our guest is not what he seems. Perhaps you will see what others cannot." She inclined her head slightly, her gaze sweeping over the stranger. She did not bow nor smile. Instead, she moved closer, circling him slowly, the faint scent of jasmine trailing in her wake. "You carry yourself like a man of discipline," she said softly, her voice smooth as silk. "But discipline is a cage. Smoke loosens such cages. Desire breaks them." The stranger met her gaze without flinching, and cages also keep men safe. Her lips curved, not into a smile, but into something sharper. Approval, perhaps. She leaned in close enough for her whisper to brush against his ear. "I have seen men who thought themselves safe. Some of them still breathe, most do not." The merchant watched the exchange in silence, his eyes gleaming with amusement. For him this was a test, a game of masks of smoke and shadows. If the stranger faltered here, he would be unworthy of trust. But the stranger did not falter. He held Layla's gaze, steady as stone, and for the first time her expression softened not with affection but with recognition. She saw something in him, something buried, something dangerous. When she turned back to the merchant, her words were simple. "He hides much, but not from weakness. From purpose." The merchant's smile widened faintly. "Good, then perhaps he will survive Cairo." Layla settled onto a cushion near the merchant, her presence filling the chamber like perfume. The stranger realized then that she was not merely a courtesan, nor a spy. She was a weapon, one as carefully wielded as the smoke, as the whispers, as the knives hidden in shadows, and in Cairo, weapons were never far from blood. The nights in Cairo had their own rhythm. Some were filled with laughter spilling out of taverns, others with the quiet murmurs of lovers in shadowed courtyards. But within the hidden lounges where smoke curled endlessly upward, the rhythm was slower, heavier, like the heartbeat of a secret waiting to be spoken. For the stranger, these nights had become a test of endurance. He had learned the ways of the smoke, the weight of whispered bargains, the silent currency of secrets. Yet one challenge proved more dangerous than the master's scrutiny or the merchant's power. Layla al-Zara, the courtesan of Cairo. At first, their exchanges were brief, almost harmless, measured glances across the haze, a word dropped casually, a smile that might have been real or simply part of her role. But slowly, something shifted. She lingered longer when he entered, her gaze sharper when he spoke. And though her laughter still danced for others, her silences seemed reserved for him. One evening, the merchant dismissed his circle early. Only Layla and the stranger remained in the chamber, the lamps burning low, the air thick with smoke and the faint scent of jasmine. She sat opposite him, her veil undone, the faint glimmer of her bracelets catching the light. "You do not belong here," she said, her voice low but firm. The stranger exhaled slowly, letting the smoke rise between them like a wall. "And yet, here I am." Her eyes narrowed, studying him as if searching for cracks in stone. "Men come here to forget, to lose themselves. But you guard yourself with silence. Silence is heavier than secrets. It makes others wonder what you hide." He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "And what do you think I hide?" She tilted her head, her smile faint, unreadable. "A purpose, perhaps a dangerous one. But purpose can be shaped. Smoke blurs edges, softens truths, and sometimes it binds two strangers together before either realizes it." The stranger felt the weight of her words, heavier than the pipe in his hand. He wanted to resist, to hold himself apart. Yet in her eyes, he saw not only danger but reflection, someone who also lived behind masks, who also carried secrets too sharp to be spoken. The silence stretched, long enough to become a language of its own. Her hand brushed against the cushion, close enough to his that the distance between them felt deliberate. The smoke swirled, hiding half her face, revealing only her eyes. Dark, endless searching. "You should not trust me," she whispered finally. "And yet," he murmured, his voice steady but softer than before, "I do." Her lips curved, not into a courtesan's practiced smile, but into something fragile, almost human. She looked away, drawing her veil back into place as though hiding that rare glimpse of vulnerability. When she rose to leave, the air seemed colder, emptier. But before she stepped into the shadows, she glanced back. "A careful stranger. In Cairo, even romance is smoke. Beautiful, intoxicating, and dangerous." The stranger sat alone, the chamber echoing with her absence. He knew she was right. Yet he also knew something had begun, something neither of them could control, bound as much by suspicion as by desire. And in the world of smoke and secrets, such beginnings rarely ended without fire. The night settled heavy over Cairo, pressing its weight against the narrow alleys and the towering gates of the city. The smoke lounges, hidden in the folds of the ancient streets, pulsed with quiet life. Behind shuttered doors and curtained rooms, men leaned close over pipes, women whispered secrets between laughter, and merchants signed invisible contracts written not in ink, but in the haze of trust and betrayal. The stranger had grown used to the rhythm of these places. He had learned that a man's words could mean less than the way he passed the pipe. That silence often shouted louder than declarations. Yet this night something shifted. A quiet message moved through the lounge, not spoken, not shouted, but carried like a phantom in the smoke itself. He noticed it first in the way one of the younger attendants bent too low when refilling the master's pipe, slipping a folded scrap beneath the cushion before bowing away. No one else seemed to notice, or perhaps they chose not to. The stranger's eyes lingered, sharp and watchful, tracing the path of the folded paper as it changed hands, not directly, but with practiced subtlety. A cough here, a spilled cup there, until it vanished into the sleeve of a merchant too calm to be innocent. The stranger leaned back, smoke rising lazily from his lips, though his mind sharpened like a blade. A letter in this place was no mere indulgence. In the world of smoke, words written on paper carried more danger than a dagger. Later that night, when the chamber thinned and the guests slipped into the Cairo darkness, he found himself walking the corridor where lamps burned low, casting more shadow than light. A figure stepped into his path, small, veiled, hurried. She glanced left, then right, and pressed something against his hand before vanishing into the alley. A letter. The paper was warm, as though it had travelled close to someone's heart. His first instinct was to discard it, to rid himself of whatever trap had just been thrust upon him. But curiosity, that dangerous companion, held him still. He unfolded it carefully, expecting codes, riddles, or threats. Instead, the words were simple, written in hurried Arabic, yet carrying the weight of secrecy. The Sultan's men move through Bab al-Zuwayla tomorrow night. Smoke will not shield you. Be ready, the stranger read it again, slower this time, his pulse quickening. The letter was not meant for him, that much was clear, yet fate, or misdirection, had placed it in his hands. Why him? Why now? Now. He tucked the letter deep inside his robe, though it burned against his chest like a coal. Every step back toward the lounge felt heavier. The walls seemed to lean inward, the whispers sharper, the shadows longer. He could feel eyes on him, though when he turned, there was only emptiness. Oh. When he entered the chamber again, Layla was there. She sat by the cushion where she always drew the eye of every man, her bracelets shimmering in the lamp's dim glow. Yet tonight, her gaze darted briefly, too briefly, to his chest, where the letter lay hidden, and in that glance he knew. She knew about the message. The stranger settled beside her, forcing calm into his movements. The master spoke in the corner. The merchant laughed too loudly at a joke, but the air between him and Layla grew heavy. She leaned closer, her perfume a dangerous sweetness. "You carry something that was not meant for you," she murmured, her lips hardly moving. His hand tightened slightly on the pipe, and yet it found me. Her eyes met his, sharp, unblinking. "Then your night has just become far more dangerous." She leaned back, resuming her courtesan's grace, laughter spilling easily as though nothing had been said. But her warning cut deeper than the words of the letter itself. The stranger sat still, smoke curling upward in thin spirals, each coil vanishing into the rafters. Around him, the lounge moved with its usual rhythm, voices, laughter, the scrape of cups. Yet beneath it all, he could feel the pulse of danger, the secret heart of Cairo beating faster, pushing him toward a crossroads he had not chosen. The letter was no longer just paper. It was a key, a weapon, and a death sentence, all at once, and now he was its unwilling bearer. The lounge had begun to empty, though the silence left behind was heavier than the laughter that once filled the air. The stranger remained seated, his body relaxed but his mind alert, listening to the way sandals scraped against the marble, the way doors creaked shut, and the way whispers lingered in the corners like ghosts. He touched the letter once more inside his robe. Its edges were rough, torn hastily from some larger sheet. Whoever had written it had done so in urgency, perhaps in fear, but what chilled him more was the clarity of its words. They were not riddle, not poetry, but a warning stripped to its bone. Tomorrow night, Bab al-Zuwayla, the Sultan's men. The stranger rose slowly and slipped into the corridor. The air outside carried the night's coolness, though it did little to ease the heat in his chest. Cairo slept in patches, merchants dozing in their stalls, cats slinking across rooftops, drunkards laughing in the shadows. But beneath the surface, he felt the city awake, watching, listening. At the gate of the lounge, Layla appeared again, her veil now drawn low. She did not speak until they were alone under the flickering torchlight. "You shouldn't carry that lettuce," she whispered, her voice as soft as the rustle of silk. "It is a chain tied to your neck." "Then why was it given to me?" the stranger asked, his tone measured. "Because you were there, because you looked like a man who could vanish into the smoke." Or perhaps, she paused, her eyes narrowing, perhaps someone wanted you to be seen with it. The thought pierced him. To hold a secret in this city was dangerous. To be suspected of holding one could be fatal. He looked at Layla, her face half hidden in shadow, and wondered, was she trying to save him or guide him into a trap? Before he could answer, a sound cut through the night, hurried footsteps, too quick to be casual. From the mouth of the alley, two figures emerged, cloaked, their strides purposeful. Layla stiffened. The Sultan's guards, she breathed. They hunt in silence like jackals. Without another word, she seized his arm and pulled him into the narrow slit of an adjoining alley. The walls pressed close, the stench of damp stone rising. They moved quickly, Layla's steps swift despite her flowing garments, until they reached a wooden door half buried in shadow. She knocked once, soft, deliberate. The door creaked open just enough for them to slip inside. The stranger found himself in a small chamber lit by a single oil lamp. Smoke lingered here too, though faint, curling from a neglected pipe on the floor. The man inside, thin and sharp-eyed, looked at Layla first, then at the stranger. "This is him?" the man asked. His voice was not welcoming. Layla nodded. The letter fell into his hands. The man's gaze hardened. The man's gaze hardened. Then he is marked. The stranger straightened, unwilling to appear weak before this unknown judge. I did not seek it, he said evenly. But I will not pretend I do not have it. He pulled the folded scrap from his robe and placed it on the table between them. The thin man did not touch it. He merely studied it as though the words might leap from the paper to strike him. At last he said, "This message was meant for one of ours. Someone has interfered, someone dangerous, and now the danger has found me." The stranger replied. The man's eyes flicked up, sharp as a blade. "Yes. And it will not let you go easily." Layla moved closer, her voice urgent. "We cannot leave him in the open. The guards already circle. If they find him with that paper, they will not find me," the stranger cut in, his tone edged with steel. "But I must know, who was it meant for? Who was it meant for? And why warn of Bab al-Zubaylah?" The thin man hesitated, then leaned forward. His whisper was harsh. "Because the Sultan's shadow stretches longer than you think. Bab al-Zubaylah is not just a gate. It is a cage. It is a cage. Tomorrow night, blood will be spilled there, smoke will cover betrayal, and the Sultan's men will strike. Whoever sent this letter tried to keep one of ours alive, and now you carry that burden." The words settled like stones in the stranger's chest. A cage, blood, betrayal. His mind turned quickly, searching for angles, for possibilities. Was this warning truth or a lure to draw him into the trap himself? Before he could press further, a pounding echoed against the outer wall. Heavy fists. Voices barked in Arabic, sharp and commanding. "Open in the name of the Sultan." The thin man's face went pale. Layla's hand clutched the stranger's arm again. In that instant, he realized the letter had already done its work. It had marked him, dragged him into the game of shadows he had tried to only observe. The door shuddered with another blow. A crew shuddered with another blow. The lamp trembled, throwing wild shadows across the room. The stranger exhaled once, calm, though his blood ran hot. "Then it begins," he said, and in the silence that followed, the smoke in the room seemed to thicken, curling like the breath of the city itself, as if Cairo leaned closer to hear what choice he would make. The pounding at the door grew heavier, shaking the wooden frame as if it were no more than a fragile red. Smoke thickened in the air, not from leisure but from panic, the attendants hurriedly blowing out lamps, shoving cushions aside, trying to erase any trace of what had just taken place. But the smoke betrayed them. It clung to the walls, lingered in the rafters, a ghost of their forbidden gatherings. The stranger's hand brushed against the hidden letter in his robe. It burned against his chest as if every strike at the door were a hammer falling closer to his heart. Layla, calm on the surface, leaned near his ear without looking at him. "Do not move until I tell you," she whispered. The master, his presence commanding even now, stood in the centre of the lounge, arms crossed, eyes narrowed. Arms crossed, eyes narrowed. He didn't flinch at the booming voice outside. "Open in the name of the Sultan." The stranger's pulse quickened. The words from the letter echoed inside him. The Sultan's men moved through Bab al-Zubaylah tomorrow night, yet here they were, a day earlier. Or perhaps, he thought grimly, tomorrow had already begun. With a sudden crack, the door splintered, and guards poured in, steel helmets catching the flickering light, curved blades drawn, their boots scattering ash and broken cups across the floor. Chaos erupted. Attendants dove for cover, merchants cursed under their breath, and one man made the fatal mistake of reaching for his dagger. A guard struck him down before the steel left his sheath, his body collapsing onto the cushions, smoke curling around him like a shroud. The stranger stayed still, his instinct screaming to act, but Layla's words anchored him. He watched as the guards moved with practiced precision, circling the room, eyes sharp for signs of guilt. One of them lifted a cushion, another upturned a tray, and the clang of falling cups echoed like bells of doom. Then came the moment he dreaded. A tall officer, his armour glinting in the dim light, stopped before him. The man's gaze swept across the stranger's face, lingered too long, then moved to his chest, the very place where the letter lay hidden. "Search him," the officer commanded. 2 guards stepped forward. The stranger's breath caught, his hand tightening around the pipe he still held, though it was now nothing more than a weapon of desperation. Just as one of the guards reached for him, Layla's voice cut through the haze. "He is mine." The room froze. Even the master's eyes flicked toward her. Wouldst I? Layla rose with the grace of a queen, her veil half drawn, her eyes burning with authority. "This man owes me a debt," she said, her tone both daring and dismissive. "If you touch him, you interfere with my business. And you know the Sultan values my business." The officer hesitated. Whispers rippled through the lounge. Everyone knew Layla was no ordinary courtesan. Her ties to the palace, her influence in hidden networks, her way of turning secrets into survival. To offend her was to risk more than scandal. It was to risk vanishing into the alleys of Cairo, never to return. The officer narrowed his eyes but slowly raised his hand, signalling his men to step back. "What's your debts, woman?" he sneered. "They may cost you more than coin." With that, he turned sharply, ordering his men to finish their sweep. Cushions were torn, pipes smashed, the air heavy with the scent of fear. But the stranger remained untouched, the letter still pressed against his chest like a curse wrapped in parchment. When the guards finally withdrew, leaving behind a trail of destruction, silence settled heavy over the room. Broken cups lay in pools of spilt coffee, smoke drifted in uneven wisps, and the body of the slain man remained covered only by a thin cloth. The master exhaled slowly, his eyes unreadable. He looked at the stranger for a long moment before turning away, saying nothing. But his silence was louder than any accusation. Layla, however, leaned close once more, her voice soft, a blade wrapped in silk. "And now," she said, "you owe me a debt too." The stranger's jaw tightened. He knew she was right. Without her intervention, the letter would already be in the Sultan's hands, and he would be a corpse cooling on the lounge floor. He glanced toward the broken door, the night beyond darker than ever. Somewhere out there, the true owner of the letter waited, or perhaps hunted. And now, by fate or by design, the stranger was entangled deeper than ever in Cairo's hidden war. The smoke swirled around him, and for the first time he felt it choke. The smoke had begun to thin, curling lazily toward the rafters, as if even it was too weary to linger. The door still hung crooked on its broken hinge, a silent reminder of the raid. The bodies of cushions and shattered cups lay scattered like fallen soldiers after a forgotten battle. Yet in the midst of ruin, silence ruled. The stranger sat rigid, his hand brushing against the hidden letter again and again, as though making sure it hadn't vanished into the chaos. He could still feel the officer's gaze, still hear the sharp edge in Layla's voice when she had claimed him as hers. Every heartbeat carried the weight of a debt he had never chosen to owe. The master finally spoke. "You brought danger into my house." His voice was calm, but in that calmness was something darker than rage. He stood at the far side of the lounge, his arms clasped behind his back, his gaze fixed not on the stranger, but on the smoke rising from a cracked pipe. The stranger held his tongue. He knew too little, and words might turn against him, faster than a blade in an alley. The master turned his head at last, eyes sharp, unreadable. "Do you carry something that belongs to them?" The question was not shouted. It was not even an accusation. It was a quiet knife, slipped between ribs. The stranger's fingers brushed the edge of the parchment again, but he did not move to answer. Layla intervened before silence could condemn him. "He carries only what fate pressed upon him," she said. Her tone was measured, a veil of protection wrapped in ambiguity. The Sultan's men smelled fear where they should have smelled smoke. That is all. The master's lips curved, almost a smile, but colder. "A fate is not welcome in my house. Only loyalty." His words struck deeper than the stranger expected. This was no ordinary lounge. This was a place where debts and allegiances were currency sharper than gold. The smoke here was not just a pleasure. It was a veil, a bargaining chip, a weapon. Then, almost imperceptibly, something shifted. One of the surviving attendants returned with a tray of untouched cups salvaged from the raid. As he placed them down, a folded scrap of parchment slipped from beneath his sleeve. It fluttered onto the carpet near the stranger's feet. The stranger bent instinctively, picking it up before the attendant could. His eyes scanned the surface. It bore no words, only a simple mark, an inked crescent, split down the centre. The master's gaze flicked toward it, then back to the stranger. Nothing was said, yet the tension in the room coiled tighter. Layla leaned closer, whispering so faintly he almost missed it. "That mark is not for you. Yet now it is in your hand. Do not let him see your fear." The stranger slipped the parchment into his robe alongside the letter. Two secrets now pressed against his chest, both heavy, both dangerous. He looked up to find the master watching him still, eyes like coals hidden in ash. The silence stretched long, then the master spoke once more. "Ejiro tests men. Some are broken, some are remade. The question, stranger, is which you will be." The smoke shifted again, as if the city itself had exhaled through these hidden halls. And in that moment, the stranger realized what Layla had already known. He was no longer free to leave. The letter had chosen him. Or perhaps the city had so. The lounge had fallen into an uneasy quiet, the kind that does not soothe but suffocates. Even the smoke, once thick with warmth and comfort, now carried the sharp edge of secrets, too heavy to remain hidden. The stranger sat with his back against the wall, every nerve awake, the weight of 2 parchments pressing against his chest like twin daggers. Layla had retreated into the shadows, her eyes never leaving him. She had become less a woman and more a question, one that both threatened and protected. The master stood still by the broken doorframe, his silhouette cutting a dark shape against the lantern light outside. "You will leave before dawn," the master said at last, his tone flat, as if delivering a verdict. "But you will not leave alone." The stranger stiffened. Alone? Alone? The master stepped closer, his robes brushing across the floor like whispers of silk. "There are eyes on you now. Men who believe you carry more than smoke in your pockets. You cannot walk Cairo's streets as you did yesterday." The stranger felt the crescent-marked parchment like fire against his ribs. "And if I choose to leave anyway?" he asked quietly. The master's lips curled in something that was neither a smile nor a threat, but carried both. Cairo eats men who choose poorly. Before the stranger could reply, an attendant appeared from behind the curtains, holding a sealed clay vial no bigger than a thumb. He handed it to Layla, who in turn brought it forward and set it on the low table before the stranger. "This," she said softly, "will guide you. Not in the way you think, but in the way you need. Break it when the city corners you. The smoke will tell those who know." The stranger frowned. "I tell them what?" Her gaze darkened. "That you are not prey." The words lingered in the air like incense. The stranger took the vial, tucking it inside his robe beside the parchments. He now carried 3 secrets, each heavier than the last. The master leaned close, his voice low enough that only the stranger could hear. "Do not mistake possession for power. You hold letters and marks, but they hold you. All. And if you cannot learn the difference, Cairo will decide for you." The lantern sputtered. A draught of wind slipped through the ruined door, carrying with it the faraway cry of a muezzin preparing to summon the city for prayer. The night was nearly over. The stranger rose slowly, adjusting his cloak. His eyes met Layla's one last time. There was no smile, no warmth, only an unspoken warning, and perhaps a reluctant alliance. When he stepped outside, the streets were still and waiting. Cairo, vast and veiled, lay before him like a maze carved in shadow. Somewhere in its alleys, men hunted him. Somewhere in its chambers, secrets waited to be uncovered. And in his chest, a letter sealed with silence burned hotter than fire. Cairo's night was never silent, but that night carried a peculiar stillness. The moon had hidden behind clouds, spilling only a faint cold light over the narrow streets. The alleys were alive with shadows, yet the sounds of the city seemed distant, muffled, as if the air itself were holding its breath. The stranger moved cautiously, following the path Layla had shown him. Every step made him feel the city's walls closing in, watching. He approached Bab al-Zuwayla, but his path soon twisted into a tighter, darker lane known to the locals as Souk al-Akalid, better whispered as the Alley of Jackals. Stories claimed that here, thieves, assassins, and secret agents of the Sultan all hunted their prey. Walking this alley at night was like stepping into the mouth of wolves, blindfolded. The stranger wrapped his cloak tighter around him, feeling the pouch of smoke, given by the master and Layla, press against his chest. What was once a comfort now weighed like a seal of responsibility. Every step echoed against the stone walls, and yet every shadow seemed alive, moving just beyond the corner of his eyes. Then he heard it. A faint scrape on stone, soft footfalls behind him, and then a quiet laugh that seemed to slide through the alley like smoke. A shadow flickered across a low balcony overhead, then vanished as if it had never been there. The city was no longer welcoming. In the Alley of Jackals, his first real test had begun. Cairo's night had a way of swallowing sound, yet every footstep seemed amplified in the narrow lanes. The stranger moved cautiously, cloak drawn tight around his shoulders, every sense alert to the shadows that slithered along the walls. He had left the relative safety of the lounge behind, stepping into streets that were alive with secrets, whispers, and danger. The moon was hidden, a thin veil of clouds turning its pale light into a diffuse glow. The alleys twisted unpredictably, each turn folding him into another layer of darkness. He approached a lane known among merchants and thieves alike as Souk al-Akalid, whispered among those who dared not speak its full name, the Alley of Jackals. The stories warned that here, Anyone could vanish, swallowed by shadows, betrayed by the unsuspecting, or cornered by a blade. The stranger knew that even the smallest sound could betray him, yet he had no choice but to move forward. Every corner might conceal the Sultan's agents, loyalists of the master, or merciless thieves waiting for prey. He felt the pouch Layla had given him press against his chest, the smoke inside no longer a comfort, but a silent warning. It was as if the city itself had pressed a hand upon him, testing his courage, measuring his worth. A faint movement caught his eye. On the edge of a balcony, a shadow shifted and disappeared before he could identify it. His pulse quickened. Something in the air told him he was not alone. He was not alone. The alley seemed to tighten around him, stones pressing inward, the smell of damp walls mixing with smoke from nearby hearths. A sudden sound, a soft scraping against stone, made him freeze. He pressed himself against the wall, barely breathing. Another step, deliberate, slow, slow. A laugh, quiet but sharp, echoed from deeper in the alley. The stranger's hand brushed the edge of the pouch instinctively. He realized with a chill that ran along his spine that this alley was not merely a passage, it was a trap, or at least a test. Every shadow, every faint whisper seemed to have been set there intentionally. And somewhere, someone watched. The stranger slowed his steps, counting and listening. He tried to remember the layout Layla had described, the subtle markers she had given him to navigate the city safely. But in this twisting, shadowed path, the alleys all began to look the same. Every doorway, every jutting stone could conceal a hunter, or worse, a traitor. He paused at a narrow intersection, listening. The faint echo of his own movement returned to him like a whisper from the walls themselves. He sensed the eyes, always just beyond vision, tracking him, measuring him. One wrong move and the alley would not release him. The breeze shifted through the street, carrying the scent of burnt herbs, sweat, and something metallic. He recognized it immediately. The smell of fear, or perhaps of blood not yet spilled. It pressed him forward, warning him, demanding caution. The stranger moved on, each step deliberate, testing the floor for sound, glancing at corners, listening to the whispers of the city. He understood now that survival in Cairo did not depend on strength alone, nor on wits alone. It depended on knowing when to trust and knowing when even shadows might lie. As he reached the center of the alley, the space narrowed further. Stones jutted from walls, forcing him to move single file. He could feel the weight of unseen eyes upon him, the alley itself alive, breathing around him. Somewhere ahead, movement stirred, quick, deliberate. A shadow detached from the darkness and disappeared, leaving only a faint whisper that slid through the alley like smoke. The stranger's hand went to the pouch again. The city had begun its test, and in the alley of jackals he would soon learn just how dangerous the unseen could be. The alley seemed endless, winding like a serpent through Cairo's underbelly. Every step the stranger took echoed against stone walls, yet it was not the sound of his own movement that unnerved him. It was the faint shuffle behind him, subtle enough that anyone untrained might dismiss it as the city itself shifting, but deliberate enough to set his nerves alight. He pressed himself against the wall, eyes scanning the darkness. A shadow detached itself from the far end of the alley. A man, thin and nimble, moving with quiet purpose. The stranger's pulse quickened. He could feel the pouch of smoke against his chest, its presence a reminder that every move could be both weapon and bait. The man ahead stopped and crouched, as if sensing him. Then, with sudden swiftness, he lunged. The stranger barely sidestepped, the attacker's dagger scraping the stone where he had just stood. Sparks flew as steel met stone, and the narrow alley amplified every movement, every hiss of breath. Instinct took over. The stranger swung the pouch toward the attacker, the smoke inside leaking out in a thick cloud. The sudden haze confused the man, making him cough and falter. The stranger pressed forward, slipping past him and keeping the smoke between them like a shield. But the attack had been only the first. From hidden corners and darkened doorways, more figures emerged, hunters of the alley of jackals, silent and fast, intent on testing him. Their eyes glinted in the faint moonlight, weapons poised, waiting for any sign of weakness. The stranger's mind raced. He remembered Layla's words. The city itself will test you. Smoke will tell those who know. He pulled another pinch from the pouch and ignited it, the acrid scent of burning herbs filling the air. The hunters coughed, stumbled, and for a brief moment he had the alley to himself. But that moment passed quickly. One of the hunters recovered faster than the others, leaping toward him from the shadows. The stranger ducked just in time, feeling the cold bite of steel scrape past his shoulder. He rolled forward, narrowly avoiding the edge of a broken crate, and sprang to his feet, every muscle tensed. He realized the alley was no longer just a passage. It had become a gauntlet. Every step, every turn was a potential ambush. Yet he could not stop. Backtracking would be as dangerous as moving forward. He had to survive, to reach the edge of the alley, to understand who was hunting him and why. Heavy, heart-pounding, he navigated through the maze of stone and shadow, his hands occasionally brushing against walls to steady himself. The smoke from his pouch curled around corners, hiding him, confusing his pursuers. Yet he knew this was only the beginning. The Alley of Jackals would not give up its secrets easily, and he was far from safe. At the far end, a faint light flickered, a lantern hanging low from a balcony, swinging gently. The stranger's eyes fixed on it, realizing it was not merely illumination, but a signal. Someone had marked the path, intentionally or not. He inched toward it, every sense alert. The hunters were close, their presence a whisper against the stone, and he knew that even a single misstep could end him. The alley had claimed many before, but tonight he intended to survive. And somewhere in the darkness, a pair of eyes watched him. Not just any eyes, but those who understood the rules of the hunt far better than he did. The Alley of Jackals had revealed its teeth. Now it was a matter of whether he could evade them long enough to learn who wielded the bite. He paused at a narrow intersection, listening. The faint echo of his own movement returned to him like a whisper from the walls themselves. He sensed the eyes, always just beyond vision, tracking him, measuring him. One wrong move, and the alley would not release him. A breeze shifted through the street, carrying the scent of burnt herbs, sweat, and something metallic. He recognized it immediately. The smell of fear, or perhaps of blood not yet spilled. It pressed him forward, warning him, demanding caution. The stranger moved on, each step deliberate, testing the floor for sound, glancing at corners, listening to the whispers of the city. He understood now that survival in Cairo did not depend on strength alone, nor on wits alone. It depended on knowing when to trust, and knowing when even shadows might lie. As he reached the center of the alley, the space narrowed further. Stones jutted from walls, forcing him to move single file. He could feel the weight of unseen eyes upon him, the alley itself alive, breathing around him. Somewhere ahead, movement stirred, quick, deliberate. A shadow detached from the darkness and disappeared, leaving only a faint whisper that slid through the alley like smoke. The stranger's hand went to the pouch again. The city had begun its test, and in the Alley of Jackals, he would soon learn just how dangerous the unseen could be. The stranger pressed himself against the wall, listening. The footsteps that had chased him moments ago had faded, but the feeling of being watched remained, more insistent than ever. Every shadow seemed alive, stretching toward him, curling around corners, hiding eyes that did not belong to ordinary passers-by. He moved cautiously, measuring each step against the narrow walls, counting the cracks in the stones, the slight shifts in the alley's texture. And then he noticed it, a flicker of movement from above, a shadow sliding along a balcony rail, vanishing almost as soon as it appeared. Not a thief, he realized, not a random predator. Someone, or something, was tracking him. His mind went back to the letter, the crescent mark, and the clay vial full. They had been gifts, warnings, tools, but perhaps also bait. The thought made him pause, a chill running down his spine. Could the very people he trusted be the ones laying this trap? A soft whistle echoed from deep within the alley, almost playful in its tone. His muscles tensed. The alley had teeth, yes, but now he sensed fangs hidden behind masks of shadow. From the corner of his eye he caught movement again. 3 figures slipping silently between doorways, watching, waiting, not attacking yet. The stranger slowed, blending into the wall's texture, letting the shadows claim him as one of their own. He could feel the city's heartbeat in this alley, the pulse of its hidden power, the watchful gaze of those who ruled not in the light, but in whispers and smoke. A sudden thought struck him. The attacks, the shadows, the hunters, they were too precise, too coordinated. Someone with knowledge of his movements had orchestrated this. And the first taste of betrayal crept into his mind like a poison. What if the very network he was entering had already judged him, marked him, even before he stepped into the alley? He reached the end of a narrow passage where a faint glimmer of lantern light broke through. The glow seemed innocuous, but the stranger's instinct screamed otherwise. It was a signal, he knew, perhaps to lure him, perhaps to test him. and from that light came the faintest hint of a silhouette, someone standing still, observing hidden in plain view. The alley was no longer merely dangerous, it had become a chessboard. And somewhere, someone had already moved their pieces. He adjusted his cloak, moving silently, his every sense stretched taut. The hidden observers made no sound, yet he felt them in every shift of air, in every echo. It was clear, the Alley of Jackals was more than a physical threat. It was a lesson in mistrust, a place where betrayal could hide in the faintest shadow. And as the stranger pressed forward, he realized that survival here would not be about strength or speed alone. It would be about perception, about knowing who watched, and about understanding that the city's eyes were everywhere, and some of them were smiling behind masks he could not yet see. The alley seemed to tighten around him, each step bringing walls closer, shadows deeper. The stranger's breath came in shallow bursts, but his mind raced faster. Every instinct screamed that the watchers were waiting for the smallest mistake, the slightest hesitation. He reached into his pouch, feeling the clay vial Layla had given him. Smoke, a simple substance, could be transformed into a weapon. With deliberate hands, he ignited a pinch, releasing a thick, pungent cloud that rolled through the alley like a living thing. The watchers coughed, stumbled, and vanished into corners, but the relief was brief. One figure, quicker and more aware than the others, lunged from the shadows, steel glinting. The stranger barely rolled aside, feeling the cold bite of the blade as it scraped the wall beside him. He pressed forward, letting the smoke curl and swirl between him and the attacker, confusing, disorienting, and masking his movements. He used the walls, the crates, every obstacle as cover, slipping through narrow gaps and ducking behind protruding stones. Each motion calculated, every breath timed to the rhythm of the city itself. He had learned that in Cairo, knowledge of the streets was as lethal as any weapon. Then came a sudden shift, a subtle movement from above, a rope dangling from a balcony, swaying slightly as if signaling him. The stranger caught it in his hand, swinging himself across a narrow gap, landing silently on the opposite ledge. He was off the ground now, beyond the immediate reach of the hunters. From this vantage point, he could see them searching below, frustrated, coughing from the smoke, their eyes darting in every direction. He felt the first real sense of control in the alley, not safety, but a fleeting edge. A whisper of wind carried another clue. Faint footsteps retreating, leading him toward a junction. Instinctively, he followed, understanding that the alley itself was guiding him, offering paths, hiding dangers, and testing his perception. By the time he reached the end of the narrow passage, sweat mixed with smoke on his brow. The city beyond the alley lay dark and waiting, silent but full of potential threats. He had survived the immediate danger, but the watchers had not vanished. They had only retreated into deeper shadows, waiting for another move. He knew now that the Alley of Jackals had not merely been a test of reflexes. It had been a lesson in perception, mistrust, and the understanding that survival depended on reading not only shadows but intentions. And somewhere beyond the last bend, a faint light flickered, a signal, a trap, or perhaps the first step toward the betrayal that was already in motion. The alley finally began to widen, though the darkness lingered like a curtain. The stranger's steps were careful, each one calculated, but he could feel the weight of unseen eyes pressing upon him still. The hunters had retreated, for now slipping back into the shadows like ghosts. Yet the city's pulse had changed. Every stone, every corner seemed charged with intent, as if the Alley of Jackals itself had marked him, measured him, and decided that he was worth observing. Ahead, a faint glow flickered from a doorway, a lantern swinging slightly, almost inviting him. The stranger approached slowly, senses alert. He felt the clay vial and the letters in his robe, their presence a reminder that he carried not only tools but the attention of forces that he had yet to fully understand. As he neared the doorway, a soft but deliberate voice called from the shadows, "You've done well to come this far, but not everyone you trust will welcome your presence." The stranger froze, recognizing the tone. Calm, controlled, yet tinged with menace. Someone knew him, tracked him, and yet remained hidden. It was a warning, or perhaps a declaration. The real danger was no longer in the alley, but within the network he thought he could navigate. A figure emerged briefly from the darkness, hooded, their eyes glinting faintly in the lantern light, then vanished before the stranger could approach. It was enough, an unspoken message that the chase was far from over, that betrayal had already begun to take shape. The city outside the alley spread before him, vast and unpredictable. Cairo was alive, and he was a player in a game far larger than he had imagined. Every alley, every shadow, every whisper was part of a web he had only begun to enter. The stranger stepped out into the street, shoulders tense, eyes scanning every shadow. The alley had tested him, forced him to survive through cunning and perception, but it had also revealed a chilling truth. The threat was no longer just outside, lurking in the dark. It was close, possibly closer than he ever expected. And in that moment, as the lantern flickered behind him and the city exhaled its smoky breath, he understood the first unspoken rule of betrayal. It is rarely loud, rarely violent at first. It waits, it watches, it strikes when you least suspect it. The alley of jackals had not released him entirely. It had only sent him out as a warning. Somewhere in the shadows, the real predator smiled. The streets of Cairo seemed to hum with an unfamiliar menace. Even as the stranger emerged from the alley of jackals, his senses sharpened. He could feel the invisible eyes that had followed him. The city had tested him, and he had survived. But survival was no longer enough. Not here. Not in this labyrinth of shadows, smoke, and unspoken agreements. He moved cautiously through the winding streets, keeping to the darker alleys where the lamplight barely reached. Every footstep, every echo, seemed to follow a rhythm set by the city itself, a rhythm he had yet to fully understand. The letter, the crescent-marked parchment, and the clay vial pressed against his chest in his robe, each carried a secret, a warning, a tool, but also a responsibility. The weight of all three pressed on him, reminding him that the network he had stepped into was alive, watching, calculating. And someone within that network had already decided he was a target. A whisper reached him from behind a corner. At first, he thought it was the wind, the rustle of fabric, a trick of his imagination. Then he heard it clearly, a voice low and controlled, yet unmistakably familiar. "You've done well to survive this far, but not all who smile at you mean well." The stranger froze, his mind raced. The voice, it could only belong to someone close, someone he had believed to be an ally. The realization hit him like a dagger. The betrayal he had sensed, the unseen predator lurking just beyond the shadows, was no longer a theory. It was real, and it was personal. He ducked into the nearest doorway, pressing his back against the cool stone wall. The street beyond was quiet, deceptively calm. Yet he could feel the pulse of danger in the air, the subtle movements that betrayed intention. Moments later, the figure stepped into the lamplight, a man cloaked in the familiar garb of one of the lounge's trusted attendants. His face was partially shadowed, but the stranger could see the cold precision in his eyes, the unmistakable calculation of a man who had long planned this moment. "You should have stayed in the lounge," the man said, voice measured, almost polite, yet cutting sharper than any blade. "There are rules here, and you broke them the moment you walked into my alley. A why?" The stranger managed to whisper, every muscle tensed. "A why betray me?" The attendant smiled faintly, a smile devoid of warmth. "It is not about you. It is about power, about control." About control. The Master's network thrives on obedience. You were curious, dangerous, and curiosity in this city is a luxury few survive. The stranger realized the depth of the trap. Every step he had taken through the alley of jackals, every shadow he had avoided, had been orchestrated, guided, and observed by someone who had known exactly where he would go. The betrayal was not sudden, it had been planned, woven into the very streets, into the air, into the smoke he carried, and to the smoke he carried. He backed away slowly, mind racing. He had to survive. He had to understand the players in this deadly game. And above all, he had to protect the secrets he carried, because they were the only leverage he had against forces far larger and far older than himself. The man advanced, weapon barely visible, but his intent unmistakable. "Do not make this harder than it needs to be," he said. "You either come quietly, or you vanish." In a sudden motion, the stranger tossed the clay vial to the ground. Smoke erupted, thick and pungent, curling through the street like a living thing. The attacker coughed, staggered, and momentarily lost sight of him. Seizing the opportunity, the stranger darted into a narrow side street, every sense attuned to the potential of more hidden threats. As he ran, he realized that betrayal had many forms. It was not only the open threat of a dagger, but the subtle manipulation of trust, the quiet observation, the premeditated orchestration of fear. And it was far more dangerous than he had imagined. He ducked behind a low wall, catching his breath, and felt the letter press against his chest. It was no longer merely a message, it was a shield, a tool, and a warning all at once. Whoever had sent it, whoever had orchestrated this ambush, had underestimated one thing: the stranger's ability to adapt, to survive, and to think beyond the immediate danger. Then a whisper of movement caught his ear. Another figure emerged, stepping from the shadows, glinting. The stranger's pulse quickened. This was no longer a test of reflexes or wits alone. It was a test of perception, of understanding who could be trusted, and of anticipating the next move of someone who had already betrayed him once. The betrayal was complete. He could not turn back to the lounge, he could not rely on allies he had once trusted, and he could not let the letters and vial fall into the wrong hands. Every step he took now was a step through a minefield of deception. And as he moved deeper into the twisting streets, he realized the city itself was complicit. Every shadow, every whisper, every flicker of lamplight could hide the next dagger. Survival would require more than strength. It would require cunning, patience, and the ability to see betrayal before it struck. Somewhere in the distance, he heard the faint sound of footsteps, approaching, deliberate and patient. The real hunt had begun. The stranger ducked into a narrow passage, heart-hammering, every sense stretched to the limit. The footsteps behind him were careful, controlled. Someone knew how to hunt without being seen, without a misstep. Whoever had orchestrated this betrayal had experience, patience, and a cold calculation that sent a chill down his spine. He pressed himself against the wall, listening. Every creak of timber, every distant drip of water sounded amplified in the alley. Shadows twisted unnaturally, as though whispering secrets he wasn't meant to hear. Then, faint movement to his left, a figure gliding almost silently, eyes locked on him. The stranger recognized the pattern. The watchers had multiplied, or perhaps they had been waiting for him to reach this very point. He reached into his pouch again, fingers brushing the clay vial. It was heavier now with consequence, a weapon of both defense and distraction. He ignited a small portion, and thick smoke curled around the corner, obscuring his movements. The watcher stumbled, coughing, and the stranger seized the moment to sprint through another narrow alley, feeling the city itself closing and opening pathways, guiding him, or perhaps misguiding him, A memory flashed, Layla's warning: "The city will test you. Trust the smoke, but trust no one fully." The words echoed now like a prophecy. He realized the betrayal was not only of action, but of perception. Someone he had once counted on had already placed him in this trap, orchestrating every turn, every corner, every step. Ahead, a dim lantern flickered on a balcony. The stranger climbed silently, perching himself on a ledge, observing. Below, the shadowed figures moved with precision, circling, waiting for the opportune moment to strike. The betrayal was deliberate, personal, intimate. It was designed to make him doubt, to isolate him, to weaken him psychologically before any blade could find him. He exhaled slowly, letting the smoke from the vial drift upward. This city, this betrayal, was teaching him a lesson far harsher than any street fight. It demanded cunning, patience, and a cold clarity he had not yet fully mastered. The alley opened slightly into a courtyard, still shadowed, still dangerous. The stranger's pursuers were not far behind, but he had learned something crucial. Anticipation was as lethal as speed. He dropped lightly from the ledge, moving toward the shadows of an overturned cart, using it as cover. From the darkness, the hooded figure stepped forward, the very same attendant from the lounge who had betrayed him. There was no anger, no excitement, only calm, controlled intent. "You are clever," he said softly, "but cleverness alone does not save you here." The stranger lunged forward, smoke swirling around them, striking with precise movements learned from years of caution and observation. Metal met metal, each movement measured, each reaction tight and fluid. The fight was not just physical, it was psychological, a battle of wits, perception, and trust. As he evaded another strike, a realization struck him. The betrayal was deeper than one man. Someone in the lounge, someone he had considered an ally, had coordinated the watches, the hunt, and even the signals in the alley. Every step he had taken had been anticipated. Every decision had been observed. With a sudden, calculated movement, the stranger ignited the remaining portion of the clay vial, sending a wall of smoke spiraling upward. Coughing, the attackers flinched, and he used the moment to disappear into another alley. Heart racing, he realized the scope of the betrayal. It was no longer just a threat in the streets. The network he sought to navigate was laced with spies, traitors, and hidden agendas. Emerging finally onto a quieter street, he pressed himself against the wall, chest heaving. The city stretched before him, endless and unpredictable, and somewhere behind him the watchers waited, their patience unwavering. The betrayal had been revealed, but its full extent was still hidden. He understood now that survival would require more than evasion. It would require strategy, alliances formed carefully, and an unyielding awareness of the shadows around him. Trust was a currency more dangerous than any blade, and he had just learned painfully that the price of misjudgment could be death. The letter and vial pressed against his chest, heavier now with the weight of knowledge. The betrayal was complete, but the stranger knew one thing for certain: he would not remain a pawn. The game had begun in earnest, and every shadow, every whisper, every alley of Cairo was now a battlefield of perception, loyalty, and survival. The stranger moved through Cairo with caution, every shadow a potential threat, every flicker of lamplight a signal. The city's pulse was relentless, alive with whispers, smoke, and the quiet currents of power he had barely begun to understand. The betrayal in the Alley of Jackals had sharpened his perception. He now knew that every ally could be a predator, every path a trap. Yet despite the danger, he had a destination. The lounge's hidden network, the web of influence that controlled smoke, trade, and secrets. He had heard rumours of the Merchant of Dreams, a figure shrouded in myth, whose reach extended into every corner of Cairo, and whose identity was known to almost no one. Some whispered he was merely a shadow. Others claimed he could command loyalty with a glance. As the stranger approached the discreet doorway tucked between two crumbling buildings, he felt a shift in the air. The street seemed quieter here, but the calm was deceptive. He could feel the weight of observation, the subtle tension that indicated not one, but many eyes, watching, calculating, waiting. He entered the lounge through a hidden passage behind a tapestry, its folds thick and heavy with dust. No, inside, the room was dimly lit, the air thick with the scent of incense and smoke. Figures moved silently, seated at tables, observing, calculating. And then he saw him, tall, composed, with eyes that seemed to pierce the very smoke around him. The Merchant of Dreams. The stranger froze, realizing immediately that this was no ordinary dealer. Every movement was deliberate, controlled, as if he were measuring not only the people in the room, but the very air itself. There was power here, subtle yet absolute, radiating like an invisible current. "Oh, we've come far," the merchant said, voice smooth, almost hypnotic. "A farther than many before you. Yet distance alone does not guarantee survival." The stranger bowed slightly, wary, noting the careful phrasing, the deliberate control of tone. "We seek understanding, the network, the lounge, the secrets hidden within." A faint smile touched the merchant's lips. "Our secrets are valuable, yes, but they are dangerous in the wrong hands. You've already encountered betrayal, proof that trust is a fragile currency in this city, T." The stranger's mind raced. The merchant's presence explained much: the coordination in the Alley of Jackals, the precision of the betrayal, the silent signals and observers. This was the mind behind it all, orchestrating events from the shadows, using smoke and fear as tools. "You are clever," the merchant continued, "but cleverness alone is not enough. Knowledge, timing, perception, these will decide who survives, and who becomes nothing but a lesson for others." The stranger realized, with a chill, that he was now a player in a game far larger than he had imagined. The betrayal, the alleys, the letters, all threads in a web spun by someone who saw not only the present, but the potential moves of everyone in the network. The merchant rose, moving closer, and the room seemed to bend subtly around him. Every figure, every shadow seemed to shift as if obeying an unspoken command. "You will learn," he said softly. "That power in Cairo is not taken. It is woven, like smoke, through influence, fear, and loyalty, and those who fail to see it vanish quietly, leaving only whispers behind." The stranger felt the weight of the words. He had survived the streets, the betrayals, the hunters, but here, in the heart of the network, he faced a challenge far more insidious. Understanding the Merchant of Dreams, the hidden kingpin, and the larger conspiracy that controlled the smoke, lounges, the trade, and the city's secrets. He knew this was only the beginning. The stranger followed the merchant through a hidden doorway at the back of the lounge, descending a narrow stairwell that smelled of old stone, incense, and something faintly metallic. The air grew cooler, heavier, as if carrying the weight of countless secrets accumulated over decades. At the bottom, the room opened into a vast chamber lined with shelves of jars, ledgers, and vials filled with strange herbs and powders. Candles flickered in brass sconces, casting shadows that danced across walls etched with intricate maps and coded markings. This was no ordinary lounge. It was a hub, the nerve center of a sprawling network that controlled Cairo's smoke trade, its secrets, and much of its unseen influence. The merchant stopped in the center of the room, gesturing for the stranger to observe. Every lounge, every dealer, every courier you have encountered, they are all threads, and threads, when pulled correctly, can unravel the entire tapestry. The stranger's eyes swept the room. There were ledgers detailing deliveries, names of contacts whispered in hushed tones and coded notations indicating allegiances, debts, and hidden favours. He realised that the smoke, once thought a mere intoxicant, was a currency of influence, exchanged, bartered, and wielded as a tool of control. You see, the merchant continued, voice smooth and measured, in Cairo, power does not wear a crown. It wears a smile, a whisper, a carefully timed gesture. The lounges are not mere dens of pleasure or addiction. They are arenas of influence where loyalty is tested, secrets are exchanged, and positions of authority are decided without the city ever noticing. A map on the wall caught the stranger's attention. Tiny pins marked locations throughout the city, some connected by threads, others marked with symbols he did not yet understand. These are all nodes, the merchant explained, noticing his gaze. Each lounge, each contact, each courier represents an artery in the network. And every artery carries intelligence, information, and control. The stranger realized the full extent of the network's power. It was not just about controlling trade or smoke. It was about controlling knowledge, the very lifeblood of the city. A rumour here, a secret passed through a puff of smoke there, could shift fortunes, topple alliances, or even eliminate rivals before they realised the threat. And yet, the merchant said, leaning closer, even the most well-woven network has weaknesses. That is why you are here. You survived the Alley of Jackals, evaded hunters, and recognised the first signs of betrayal. You have potential. But potential alone does not grant entry into the inner web. You must understand the flow, the currents, the unseen hands guiding every move. He gestured toward a ledger open on a table. The stranger scanned it, seeing names linked to territories, secret agreements, and even personal allegiances. These are the players, as the merchant explained. The ones who believe they act independently, yet every decision they make ripples through the network. One misstep, one misplaced trust, and the consequences extend far beyond their perception. The stranger felt the enormity of what he had walked into. He had believed the betrayal in the Alley of Jackals was a singular threat, a personal test, but now he saw it for what it truly was, a demonstration of how controlled, deliberate, and vast this network had become. Every alley, every lounge, every whispered secret was part of a game he was only beginning to understand. And, the merchant said softly, almost a whisper, some secrets are too valuable to be entrusted to anyone, even to those who survive. That is the nature of this city. That is the nature of the network. Loyalty is earned through action, through sacrifice, and through recognition of the hidden currents that shape every decision. The stranger absorbed every word, realizing that the power he had glimpsed in the Alley of Jackals and the betrayal he had faced were but surface currents of a far deeper, more dangerous tide. This network, this merchant, controlled more than smoke. It controlled the flow of information, influence, and fear throughout Cairo. He knew then that survival would not be enough. To navigate this world, to uncover the deeper conspiracies, he would need allies he could trust, or at least understand. And he would need to learn the most dangerous lesson of all, that in a city where power flowed unseen, the most lethal enemies were often those closest to you. The merchant of dreams leaned back in his chair, the smoke curling around him like a veil. His eyes never left the stranger, observing, weighing, calculating. "You have survived much," he said softly, voice smooth as silk, "but survival alone does not grant understanding. And tell me, do you know why the Alley of Jackals was set for you?" The stranger hesitated, recalling every shadow, every trap. "I thought it was a test," he admitted, "or perhaps a warning. But the extent I did not realize." The merchant's lips curved into a faint, almost imperceptible smile. We test, yes, and a demonstration. You see, every alley, every lounge, every whisper is a lesson in observation and perception. But you must understand, there are forces in this city older than any sultan, older than any law, and they move like smoke, visible only to those who know where to look. The stranger's brow furrowed. Older forces? You mean beyond the lounge? Beyond the lounge, beyond the network, beyond even what you have survived so far, the merchant replied. The lounges are merely the surface. They hide a hierarchy of power that most will never perceive. And within this hierarchy there are those who manipulate events, betray allies, and shift loyalties as easily as one exhales smoke. He paused, letting the words sink in. The betrayal you encountered, it was not personal, or perhaps it was personal in a lesson rather than an intent. That alley was meant to show you the inevitability of observation, but it was also meant to prepare you for something far greater. The stranger's pulse quickened. Greater than betrayal, than the network. The merchant nodded slowly. Yes. There are players who operate beyond even my immediate influence, men and women whose reach extends through politics, commerce, and clandestine channels. The lounges, the alleys, they are merely tools in a vast game, and you, stranger, have become a piece on the board. The stranger's hand brushed against the letter still tucked inside his cloak. Its weight felt heavier now, a tangible reminder of the forces moving around him. Then this, all of this, is part of their game. Precisely, said the merchant. And you must learn quickly that in this city trust is never given. It is extracted, observed, and earned. Every ally may conceal an agenda. Every enemy may have a hand you cannot see. And the most dangerous of all are those who smile while orchestrating chaos in silence. Ours. He gestured toward a map on the wall, threads connecting lounges, marketplaces, and secret passages. These threads represent more than delivery routes or trading posts. They are arteries through which influence, secrets, and obedience flow. And at the farthest nodes, beyond the reach of even my immediate perception, lies a council, a group who shape the fate of the city without the world ever realizing their involvement. The stranger's mind raced. He understood then that the betrayal, the hunts, the smoke lounges, all were part of a bigger conspiracy, a network of influence and control spanning far wider than he had imagined. The merchant was not the end game. He was a conduit, a teacher, and a gatekeeper. Will I survive this? The stranger asked quietly. The merchant's gaze was unwavering. E-survival is only the first step. Understanding the currents, predicting the moves of those above and around you, and knowing when to strike or when to vanish, these are the lessons you must muster. Fail, and you will vanish quietly, leaving only whispers behind. A long silence filled the chamber, thick with smoke and unspoken meaning. The stranger's thoughts spun with possibilities, with the enormity of the conspiracy he now faced. Allies could be enemies, enemies could be tools, and every move he made would ripple through the unseen layers of Cairo's underworld. You have potential, the merchant concluded softly, but potential alone is fragile. Knowledge, patience, and the courage to act when all seems lost. That is what will define your place in this web. And understand this, those who appear untouchable are only so because they manipulate the perception of others. Their reality is nothing more than smoke. The stranger nodded slowly, absorbing the weight of the lesson. He had entered this world seeking understanding, perhaps even revenge, but he now realized he had entered a labyrinth where perception, influence, and the unseen hands of powerful conspirators dictated every outcome. As the merchant of dreams disappeared into the shadows at the back of the chamber, leaving the stranger with ledgers, maps, and a heavy sense of inevitability, one truth remained. The game was far larger than alleys, betrayals, or smoke lounges, and the stranger would have to learn quickly if he intended not just to survive, but to navigate, and perhaps even master, the hidden currents of Cairo's shadowed heart. The city of Cairo had a rhythm unlike any other, a pulse that danced through crowded bazaars, along winding alleys, and into the hidden lounges where smoke curled like living shadows. The stranger moved carefully, every step measured, aware that the city itself had become a web of observation, power, and betrayal. He had survived alleys, betrayals, and the lessons of the merchant of dreams. But now, the next layer awaited him. The courtesans of Cairo, women whose beauty and influence masked networks of information, allegiance, and danger. Among them, Layla was both a guide and an enigma. She held secrets not written on parchment, not whispered in alleys, but carried in subtle gestures, glances, and silences. The stranger entered a quiet courtyard behind one of the smoke lounges. A lantern flickered, casting long shadows across the cobblestones. He sensed her presence before he saw her. A figure seated at the edge of the courtyard, head bowed slightly, fingers tracing intricate patterns on a carved wooden table. Sit," she said softly, without looking up. The stranger obeyed, taking a place opposite her. "Sure." Smoke from a nearby incense burner curled between them, weaving a protective veil around their conversation. "You've survived much," Layla began, her voice almost musical, yet carrying an undercurrent of caution. "But survival is only the first step. Knowledge, perception, and the ability to read the currents beneath the city's surface, these are what truly matter." The stranger leaned forward, his eyes scanning her carefully. "I have learned that the lounges are more than dens of pleasure. They are arenas of influence, observation, power. She nodded, eyes finally meeting his. Correct. And some of that power lies not in the merchant of dreams or even in the hunters who stalk the alleys. It lies with those who weave secrets, manipulate loyalties, and guide events from the shadows. That is where I come in." Her words carried weight, and the stranger realized that Layla was not merely a participant in the network. She was an orchestrator, an observer, and perhaps a guardian of certain truths. She smiled faintly, acknowledging the understanding dawning on him. "There is intrigue everywhere," she continued. "Allies and enemies wear the same masks. Information is traded as currency, and a single misstep can unravel everything you think you know. No. Even your survival in the Alley of Jackals was orchestrated as a lesson, not punishment, but a preparation for what comes next." The stranger nodded slowly. He had suspected her importance, but now the depth of her role became clear. Layla's eyes, dark and calculating, held knowledge he had yet to uncover, knowledge of the network's inner workings, of hidden loyalties, and of the threats lying beyond even the merchant of dreams' immediate influence. "You will need guidance," she said, "but you must also understand the cost. Trust is fragile, curiosity is dangerous, and every move you make will ripple through the city in ways you cannot yet imagine." A faint breeze carried the scent of jasmine and smoke through the courtyard, wrapping around them like a living thing. The stranger understood that this was no ordinary meeting. It was the first step into a layer of Cairo's secrets that few had ever navigated. Layla leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "There are currents beneath the city, stranger, and some of them are deadly. Information, alliances, rivalries, they intersect here in ways most never perceive. And in this game, you must learn not only to survive, but to anticipate, to read, and to maneuver." The stranger felt the weight of her words. He had survived the streets, the betrayal, and the merchant's lessons, but this was different. Layla's world was one of whispers, secrets, and subtle manipulations, a domain where charm, perception, and intuition were as lethal as any dagger. "You will follow me," she said, standing gracefully. Not as a guide in the traditional sense, but as a lens into a hidden world. "And in return, you will learn the truths that even the merchant does not reveal." Layla led the stranger through a series of narrow passageways, each twisting alley more shadowed and quiet than the last. The walls seemed to lean in, and the faint echoes of distant footsteps reminded them both that the city never truly slept. "You must understand," she said softly, "that the courtesans of Cairo are more than entertainers. They are collectors of secrets, manipulators of information, and sometimes arbiters of power. Their influence flows through the same arteries that the merchant controls, but their currents are subtler, more dangerous." The stranger listened intently, realizing that her words confirmed what he had sensed. The power of this city was not just in physical strength or the reach of the lounges, but in information, observation, and manipulation. They entered a dimly lit room behind an unmarked door. Inside, women moved gracefully, conversing in hushed tones, exchanging subtle signals and gestures. Each carried an aura of authority disguised beneath elegance, charm, and careful smiles. The stranger understood immediately that this was a court of influence, and Layla was both queen and sentinel. She guided him to a corner, where the smoke curled lazily from an incense burner. "Observe," she whispered. "Watch the interactions, note the signals. You will see alliances form and dissolve within moments, all in silence. Here, perception is everything. Misreading a gesture can be fatal." The stranger's eyes followed every movement, noting the coded glances, the careful positioning of individuals, and the way information flowed without words. It was a choreography of power, subtle yet absolute, where secrets passed like currency and loyalty was always conditional. You will also learn that not all threats are obvious, Obvious continued. Some are hidden in smiles, some in gestures, some in the absence of action. And the greatest danger lies in underestimating those who appear to serve you. The stranger nodded, absorbing the lesson. Layla's world was one where charm, subtlety, and intelligence were weapons, and where survival depended on reading currents invisible to the untrained eye. She reached out, placing a hand briefly on his arm. You are ready to learn, but remember, knowledge comes with risk. Every insight, every alliance, every secret you uncover has consequences. The network, the merchant, the alleys, they are only part of the game. You are stepping into the deeper currents now, where the stakes are far higher, and the cost of error is death, the stranger understood. Layla was not only a guide but a gatekeeper to a hidden world of intrigue, influence and danger. And the deeper he went, the more he realized that survival required not just strength and cunning, but the ability to read people, situations and hidden currents of power. The night stretched on, filled with whispers, smoke and the faint flicker of lamplight. For the stranger, the journey into Cairo's hidden heart had only just begun. The night air of Cairo was thick with the scent of incense and the faint tang of the Nile. Smoke lingered along the narrow streets, curling like whispered secrets. The stranger moved silently, each step deliberate, yet his mind was caught in a tangle of thoughts about Layla. Her presence in the Courtesan network had been commanding, elegant and dangerous, but it was more than that. She had become an enigma he could not unravel. A puzzle intertwined with the city's shadows and the intrigues he was slowly beginning to understand. Every glance she offered, every subtle gesture carried meaning beyond words, a language of unspoken truths, withheld information and veiled intentions. They met in a secluded chamber of the lounge, away from prying eyes. The room was dimly lit by flickering candles, their light softened by the curling smoke. Layla moved gracefully to the center, eyes watching the stranger closely. He noticed the careful way she carried herself, the slight tension in her shoulders, and the unspoken invitation in her gaze. "You have changed," she whispered, almost teasingly, yet there was an edge of concern beneath the words. "The streets, the alleys, the merchants' lessons, they leave their mark. You walk differently now." The stranger hesitated, aware of the closeness of the space, the intimacy in the shared air. "And yet," he replied softly, "I am still learning. You guide me, but you also conceal much." Her eyes darkened slightly, a flicker of emotion he could not fully read. "Concealment is necessary," she said. "In this city, revelation is danger. Trust is a currency no one gives freely. No one gives freely. And sometimes, even those we care for must remain at arm's length." The stranger's chest tightened. He understood her words on one level, but on another, they felt like a challenge, a test of patience and of perception. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "A care. You say it, but can I believe it exists here, in a world of smoke, lies and manipulation?" Layla's eyes met his, unflinching, and for a moment the room seemed to shrink around them. The smoke curled like a living thing, weaving between them, blurring the edges of reality. "A belief is dangerous," she said softly, almost a warning, but so is denial. "Sometimes you must choose to feel, even when every instinct tells you to remain guarded." Their conversation was a dance, each word measured, each glance laden with implication. The stranger realized that his fascination with her was more than curiosity. It was recognition. She was part guide, part mirror, part challenge. And beneath the elegance and poise, he sensed a vulnerability that few could see. Layla stepped closer, brushing her hand lightly against his arm, a contact fleeting yet electric. "You must understand," she said, voice barely audible, "that emotional entanglement is a risk, but it is also a power. The heart can be used, guided, and sometimes it is the only compass through deception." The stranger's pulse quickened. He had navigated alleys, betrayals, and deadly games, yet this subtle tension, this silent dance of emotion, felt more potent than any threat he had faced. In the curling smoke, he saw not just the courtesan, not just the mentor, but someone capable of shifting his perception, influencing his choices, and drawing him into a web far more intimate than the network itself. Layla smiled faintly, a gesture that seemed both tender and inscrutable. "Tonight, you will see a truth that is rarely spoken aloud in the lounges or the streets. The heart is as much a tool as any dagger or secret. And you, stranger, must learn to wield it wisely. The stranger understood. The intrigue of Cairo's alleys, the betrayal, the merchant's lessons, all of it had prepared him, but nothing had prepared him for this. The slow, deliberate unfolding of a silent, smoke-clouded connection that promised both guidance and danger. The night deepened and the lounge grew quieter, the murmurs of patrons fading into the background. Layla led the stranger to a small balcony overlooking the courtyard below, the lantern light casting long, dancing shadows on the walls. "You see?" she said softly, gazing at the city below. "The world appears orderly from here. Streets, alleys, networks, all seem predictable. But that is an illusion. Chaos and opportunity exist side by side, and perception is the only weapon against misjudgment." The stranger watched her, captivated not just by her words, but by the elegance and conviction in her presence. "And yet," he said, "even chaos has rules. You navigate it, and I follow, learning." Layla's eyes softened, just slightly, and for a moment her mask seemed to drop. "A following is not enough. You must anticipate, feel the currents, and accept the risks. Emotional bonds, subtle trust, even attraction, they are tools, not distractions, and the one who wields them wisely survives." The stranger felt the weight of her meaning. Their relationship was no ordinary connection. It was an alliance of intuition, emotion, and strategy. He realized that every glance, every touch, every shared silence carried lessons in perception and control. The smoke from an incense burner drifted between them, curling around their feet, rising in delicate spirals. In the haze, the stranger felt a closeness, a shared vulnerability that neither had spoken aloud. It was a connection born not of love in the ordinary sense, but of mutual recognition, of two individuals navigating a world of danger, deception, and hidden agendas. "Do you trust me?" he asked quietly. The question weighted with more than simple meaning. Layla's gaze held his, unwavering. "A trust is fragile," she replied, "but awareness can guide it, and sometimes trust is necessary to survive. But remember, emotion is both weapon and shield. Misuse it, and it will wound you more deeply than any blade." The stranger nodded slowly, understanding the lesson. Their connection was a delicate balance of strategy, restraint, and perception. It was dangerous, intoxicating, and essential. A faint breeze carried the scent of jasmine and smoke across the balcony, wrapping around them like a living presence. They stood in silence, the city sprawling below, alleys twisting like veins of power and influence. In that quiet, the stranger realized the paradox of his situation. The deeper he went into the network, the more he depended on Layla, not just for guidance, but for understanding, for insight, and for the subtle anchor that kept him aware amidst the currents of intrigue. And as the night deepened, the smoke curling higher, he understood the unspoken truth. In a world of betrayal, secrets, and hidden agendas, the heart could be both compass and trap, guiding the survivor through darkness or leading them astray. Their eyes met, and in that fleeting connection, a silent promise passed between them. One of trust, tension, and the inevitable intertwining of danger and desire. The city of Cairo seemed almost to hold its breath that night, the alleyways cloaked in a foggy haze, lanterns flickering against walls streaked with shadows. The stranger moved with deliberate caution, every step calculated, every sense alert. The lessons of the merchant of dreams, the betrayal in the alley of jackals, and the intricate guidance of Layla weighed heavily on him. Tonight, the currents of the hidden network were not just whispers, they were alive, dangerous, and converging. A sudden movement caught his attention, a shadow detaching from a corner, gliding silently along the wall. The stranger's hand brushed against the clay veil in his cloak, the faint metallic scent of its contents mixed with the night air. His instincts, honed by betrayal and survival, told him that the watchers had multiplied, that the city itself had become an intricate web of observation. He moved forward, keeping to the edges of the alley. A low murmur reached his ears, words in a language of subtle gestures and silences he had begun to understand. He pressed against the wall as two figures emerged ahead, couriers of secrets perhaps, or agents of a higher order within the lounge network. Their eyes scanned the street carefully, and though they did not notice him, the stranger knew they were trained, precise, dangerous. From behind, a soft footstep. He spun, vial in hand, but saw only a fleeting shadow retreating into the fog. The city itself seemed to shift and twist, guiding and misleading him simultaneously. He was no longer merely a participant. He was an observer, a predator, and prey all at once, navigating the hidden currents of Cairo's underworld. Ahead, a narrow bridge arched over a forgotten canal. He crouched, observing the movements below, noting subtle signals, a folded sleeve, a hand brushing a lantern, the pause of a courier, as if acknowledging something invisible. Layla's words echoed in his mind. Observation is survival, perception is power. A sudden shout, distant but urgent, broke the quiet. The stranger darted forward, slipping into another alley. There, a confrontation awaited, two figures blocking the exit, their intent unmistakable. One was cloaked in the familiar dark fabric of the merchant's inner network. The other, a new presence, masked and deliberate. They had been expecting him. Steel gleamed faintly in the candlelight. The stranger reacted instinctively, igniting a small portion of the clay vial. Thick smoke surged upward, curling around the assailants and obscuring vision. He moved swiftly, delivering precise strikes, each motion measured, conserving strength while maximizing impact. The figures stumbled, coughing, flailing within the swirling haze. From the shadows, a voice. He's fast, but he doesn't understand the currents yet. The stranger froze, recognizing the voice from Layla's warnings, yet unfamiliar, foreign, commanding. This was someone higher in the hierarchy, a master manipulator orchestrating events from the periphery. The fight was no longer just survival. It was a lesson, a demonstration of the power flowing through the hidden network. He pressed forward, navigating the alleys, smoke still lingering like a living veil. The city itself seemed complicit, twisting streets, closed doors and distant lanterns guiding him into the next layer of the network. Courtyards opened briefly, then closed as silent watchers retreated. Every move, every breath carried consequence. Finally, he reached a secluded plaza. There, figures from the merchant's extended influence waited, agents, couriers and silent observers, each representing a node in the sprawling conspiracy. Their eyes followed him, calculating, judging. The stranger's pulse raced, yet his mind remained sharp. He had learned the value of patience, of observation, and of subtle countermeasures. A figure stepped forward from the cluster, tall, imposing, cloaked in midnight black. "You've come far," the voice said, calm, authoritative. "Farther than most survive, but distance alone does not grant understanding. Do you see the web now, stranger?" The stranger's eyes scanned the plaza. Threads of power were tangible here, the silent communications, the subtle signals, the flow of information moving like an unseen river. Every gesture, every glance, every placement of a hand carried meaning. He nodded slowly, understanding the full scope of the network. Lounges, alleys, courtesans, merchants, all interconnected, orchestrated by unseen hands with ambitions that stretched far beyond Cairo. Tonight, the cloaked figure continued, "You will learn what it means to be both observed and a participant. To survive is not enough. To influence, to anticipate, to manipulate without being seen, that is mastery." The stranger's hand brushed the vial again, realizing the dual nature of the tools at his disposal. The smoke, the letters, and even alliances such as Layla were instruments in a far larger game. One misstep could unravel everything. One successful move could shift the balance of power. From the edges of the plaza, movements stirred, agents converging silently, signals exchanged with subtle gestures. The stranger understood immediately. He had stepped into a battlefield of perception, influence and strategy, where every decision was both test and demonstration. As he prepared to navigate the plaza, a sudden realization struck him. The network's depth was far greater than even the merchant or Layla had fully disclosed. Beyond the lounges, beyond the alleys, beyond the courtesans and watchers, there existed a layer of power operating in near-total invisibility, a hidden council whose decisions rippled through every node, shaping destinies, manipulating outcomes, and controlling the flow of secrets and allegiances. The stranger's breath quickened. He had learned to survive the alleys, to anticipate betrayal, to read the signals, and to endure the lessons of smoke and shadow. But this, the confrontation unfolding before him, the hidden hierarchy and the palpable currents of power, was something altogether different. Steel, smoke, whispers, and shadow converged in the plaza. The stranger knew one truth. He was no longer merely surviving. He was now a player in a game of lethal perception, influence, and power, and the stakes were far higher than anything he had yet imagined. He stepped forward, ready to engage, to maneuver, and to confront the shadows that had been orchestrating every move of the city. And as the night thickened and smoke rose around him, he understood that the battles to come would not only test his skill, but his intuition, loyalty, and ability to navigate the deadly currents of Cairo's hidden heart. The lanterns flickered against the ancient stone walls, casting shadows that seemed alive, twisting and bending as if they too were conspiring. Cairo's alleys had grown quiet, almost holding their breath, as if anticipating the revelation that was about to unfold. The stranger moved cautiously, alert, each step measured. He had faced alleys, ambushes, smoke and shadow, but tonight promised a confrontation unlike any before. He entered a secluded lounge, a room he had once considered safe. The familiar scent of incense and hashish hung heavily in the air, but beneath it was a tension he could feel in his bones. Something was wrong. The patterns he had memorized, the gestures, the courtesan signals, the subtle indicators of loyalty were distorted, off-kilter. Then he saw it, a pipe, simple in appearance, resting on a carved wooden table. The brass gleamed faintly in the lamplight, but the real danger was invisible. This was no ordinary instrument of indulgence. The betrayer's pipe, legend whispered among insiders, a tool of surveillance, manipulation, and death. Those who inhaled its smoke were bound to reveal secrets, willingly or not. From the shadows, a figure emerged, familiar yet altered by intention. And Layla's eyes widened slightly as she stepped forward, a mixture of concern and determination flickering across her face. "It's time you understood," she whispered. Some betrayals are closer than you think, closer than even allies realize. The stranger's pulse quickened. Every instinct screamed that the room, the pipe, and the figures surrounding him were part of a trap orchestrated with precision. He had been navigating networks, courtyards, and alleys, yet this was a betrayal he could not have anticipated. From behind Layla, a masked figure stepped forward, tall, deliberate, and commanding. Surprised. The voice was smooth, chilling, familiar in tone. "You thought the merchant, the alleys, or the courtesans were the extent of danger, but you've underestimated the web." The stranger's eyes darted between Layla and the masked figure. Every lesson, every warning, every whispered secret flashed in his mind. The pipe, the room, the figures, it was a calculated setup. And one revelation hit him like a dagger. Someone he had trusted, someone he had considered an ally, had been orchestrating events, manipulating outcomes, and observing him from the shadows. "You see," the masked figure continued, "alliances are fragile. Loyalty is conditional. And trust is a currency easily exploited." The stranger felt a surge of anger, confusion, and adrenaline. He had navigated alleys, evaded hunters, learned the hidden currents of the lounges, and endured the merchant's lessons, but this betrayal cut deeper. It was personal, strategic, and utterly calculated. Layla stepped beside him, her hand brushing his arm, a subtle signal. "You must see the full picture," she said softly, eyes locking with his. "The betrayer's pipe is not just a weapon, it's a revelation. It exposes intentions, motives, and the hidden currents beneath every smile, every gesture. Tonight, you will see who truly moves the pieces of this city," the stranger inhaled deeply, scanning the room. Agents of the network, courtesans, and unseen observers were positioned in precise, deliberate locations. The air was heavy with smoke, each curl carrying subtle signals, each exhale a conduit for information. He realized the true danger was not the steel or the dagger. It was knowledge, and the betrayer wielded it with lethal precision. A shift in the shadows revealed the identity of the betrayer, a figure he had seen before, someone who had appeared as a minor player, a courier, a seemingly inconsequential participant in the network. Yet the careful observation, the subtle influence over events, and the manipulations now became clear. Every alley trap, every diversion, every ambiguous gesture had been part of their orchestration. The stranger's mind raced, piecing together the implications. The betrayer had positioned themselves within the merchant's network, within Layla's influence, and within the alliances he had tentatively begun to form. Every move he had made was being watched, tested, and manipulated. "Zug impatient," the betrayer said, removing the mask. The familiar face twisted into a calculated smile. "And now the game truly begins. The pipe will reveal what you cannot hide, the alliances, the secrets, and the intentions of everyone you thought you could trust." The stranger's eyes narrowed. He understood the stakes. Inhale the smoke, and vulnerability would be exploited. Resist, and confrontation was inevitable. The room itself had become a chessboard. Every participant a piece in a high-stakes game of perception, loyalty, and deception. Layla's gaze met his, steady, resolute. "You must decide," she whispered. "The betrayer tests not just skill, but judgment. Every action tonight will echo through the network. Every choice carries consequences. And sometimes, survival depends on sacrifice." The stranger's pulse quickened. He had navigated Cairo's hidden currents, learned the secrets of the alleys, the lounges, and the courtesans. But the betrayer's pipe represented a new dimension, exposure, revelation, and confrontation with truths he had not anticipated. Smoke began to curl from the pipe, faint and seductive. The betrayer gestured, and the observers shifted subtly, creating an invisible pattern of containment. Every breath, every motion, every glance was being monitored, calculated, manipulated. The stranger made a swift decision, relying on intuition honed through months of perilous navigation. He would not be ensnared passively. Movement, misdirection, and observation became his weapons. The room, once a trap, now became a stage for his strategy. Steel flashed, shadows lunged, and the smoke curled like living tendrils. The betrayer's influence was formidable, but the stranger's perception, agility, and understanding of subtle currents allowed him to counter, to maneuver, and to survive. Every move revealed new layers. Hidden observers, subtle manipulations, and the true extent of the conspiracy reaching beyond lounges and alleys into the unseen heart of Cairo's power. By the time the smoke cleared, the room was tense but controlled. The betrayer remained a threat, their intentions partially revealed, yet their ultimate plan still shrouded. The stranger understood one truth. The web of deception was far more intricate than he had imagined, and the stakes had just escalated to a level where only mastery of perception, strategy, and alliances could ensure survival. And in that moment, as the candles flickered and shadows retreated to the corners, he realized that betrayal was no longer an isolated event. It was a constant current, a force he would have to navigate, anticipate, and ultimately confront if he hoped to master the smoke, the shadows, the smoke, the shadow, and the unseen powers that ruled Cairo. Cairo's early morning fog clung to the streets like a shroud, muting the clatter of carts and the chatter of merchants. But beneath the city's seeming calm, currents of power moved swiftly, invisible yet forceful, dictating events far beyond the alleyways and lounges the stranger had learned to navigate. Tonight, the network's tendrils would reach the very heart of power, the Sultan's court. The stranger moved carefully through the outer districts, following signals he had gathered through months of observation. Layla had briefed him earlier. The Sultan's shadow stretches into every alley, every lounge, every network of influence. To survive, you must understand not just the courtesans and merchants, but the politics that flow above them. He reached a narrow side street near the palace, a corridor seldom used by ordinary citizens. Guards in muted uniforms passed by, their hands resting lightly on scabbards, yet their eyes flicked continuously, scanning, judging, observing. The stranger's pulse quickened. He had infiltrated dangerous networks, faced betrayal, and survived smoke-filled confrontations. But this was an entirely different layer of peril. From the shadows emerged a figure, a court envoy cloaked in the colours of influence. Their approach was silent, almost predatory. "You understand the stakes," the envoy whispered, "but the court sees only what it wishes to see. The Sultan's favour is fickle, and those who maneuver without subtlety vanish quietly." The stranger nodded, feeling the weight of centuries of tradition, influence, and hidden power pressing down. The network he had begun to map was not limited to lounges or courtesans. It extended into political chambers, financial transactions, and even whispered orders from the Sultan himself. Every alliance, every betrayal, every carefully placed agent rippled through the city's power structure. Ahead, the palace gates loomed, imposing and heavily guarded. Yet the stranger noted the subtle cues, shifts in the guards' formation, flickers of recognition in their eyes, and the almost imperceptible signals that indicated the presence of the Sultan's own secret network of informants. He realized, as Layla had warned, that no one moved in Cairo without the shadow of the court touching them. A sudden motion from a side corridor, a messenger, seemingly unremarkable, yet carrying coded documents. The stranger intercepted the figure with quiet precision, reading the subtle markings that indicated the court's awareness of movements in the lounge network. Political stakes were higher than he had imagined. The Sultan's shadow was pervasive, extending influence through courtiers, spies, and even the merchant of dreams' own hierarchy. Within the palace walls, the stranger navigated chambers filled with whispered conversations, hidden signals, and courtiers who wielded influence as deftly as any weapon. Each movement was calculated. Every gesture contained meaning. He realized that what he had learned from Layla, from the betrayer's pipe, and from the alleys was essential, but insufficient. Survival now demanded understanding of strategy, manipulation, and the ability to read the currents of political power as deftly as those of the smoke-filled lounges. In one chamber, a meeting was underway. Courtiers, merchants, and agents of influence spoke in hushed tones, passing information through coded language, gestures, and brief glances. The stranger observed, noting alliances forming and dissolving within moments, rivalries simmering beneath polite nods, and the ever-present tension of the Sultan's indirect oversight. A key revelation struck him. The Sultan's influence was not exerted overtly. Rather, it flowed through intermediaries, silent watchers, and carefully placed courtiers who manipulated events while remaining unseen. The network he had previously navigated, lounges, courtesans, alleys, and merchants, was a microcosm of a far larger system of control, orchestrated at the highest levels of power. From behind a tapestry, a shadow emerged, an informant loyal to neither the merchant nor Layla but to the Sultan's vision of control. "You move well," the figure whispered. "But do you see the scope? The courtesans, the alleys, even the betrayer, they are all part of a greater design." The Sultan's shadow reaches into every node. To navigate it, you must understand not just survival, but influence itself. The stranger's mind raced. Every lesson, every secret, every act of trust or betrayal now had broader implications. He understood that the stakes were not merely personal or localized to the lounges. They extended to the governance of the city itself. Allies could be manipulated by higher powers. Enemies might be tools of the court. Every move carried risk, yet also opportunity. A subtle signal from Layla alerted him to a shift in the council's focus. The merchant of dreams was present, but his influence was secondary to the strategic positioning of courtiers aligned with the Sultan. The confrontation that had seemed immediate in the alleys now expanded to a citywide level, where perception, allegiance, and political cunning were as lethal as any blade. The stranger moved with calculated steps, weaving between courtiers, intercepting communications, and observing subtle cues that revealed the hierarchy of influence. He realized the Sultan's shadow was not a singular presence. It was a network, a system of checks, balances, and manipulations designed to maintain control, influence, and the illusion of order. Suddenly, an unexpected confrontation erupted. A faction of courtiers, previously assumed to be neutral, moved to challenge the merchant's agents. Steel flashed in the dim lamplight, but it was not merely physical combat. It was strategy, signaling, and preemptive moves executed with precision. The stranger intervened, using his knowledge of alleys, courtesans, and previous betrayals to anticipate, deflect, and neutralize threats without exposing himself entirely. Smoke from a brazier filled the chamber, curling between adversaries, obscuring lines of sight, and providing cover for subtle maneuvers. The stranger realized that every skill he had honed, from observation to intuition, from perception to manipulation, was being tested simultaneously. Through the chaos, the Sultan's envoy observed quietly, noting the stranger's moves, testing his abilities. The stakes were clear. The court would reward those who could navigate both danger and perception, and punish without mercy those who failed to anticipate the currents of influence. As the dust settled, the stranger found himself positioned at a nexus of observation. He understood the full scope: lounges, courtesans, merchants, alleys, betrayals, and even the merchant of dreams were all threads in a web extending to the Sultan's court. Influence, perception, and strategic action were not optional. They were essential for survival and advancement. The night deepened. Smoke and shadows intertwined as the stranger absorbed the lesson. To navigate Cairo's hidden world, one must master not just the alleys, lounges, and courtesans, but the currents of political power itself. And the shadow of the Sultan stretched further than any street or smoke-laden room could contain. Cairo's alleys had grown darker, almost sinister, as night fell, smoke curling like a living entity through narrow corridors. The stranger moved swiftly, senses sharpened by months of survival, betrayal, and clandestine encounters. The city was a labyrinth of intrigue, but tonight the stakes had escalated to their highest. Confrontation, revelation, and revenge awaited at every shadowed corner. He entered a courtyard behind a previously unremarkable lounge, the air thick with incense, smoke, and tension. Lanterns flickered faintly, casting long shadows across the walls. From the shadows, figures emerged, agents of the merchant, operatives of the Sultan's court, and unknown observers whose allegiance was hidden. Each movement was deliberate, each glance charged with intent. The stranger's hand brushed the hilt of a concealed dagger. Steel, he knew, could never be relied upon alone. Perception, anticipation, and cunning were the true weapon. From the corner of his eye, he noticed Layla, her silhouette poised, observing the gathering with a quiet intensity that matched his own. The courtesan network, the merchant's hierarchy, and the Sultan's shadow converged here, in one volatile crucible. "Tonight," Layla whispered, stepping close, "you will face the culmination of the webs we have traversed. Betrayal, ambition, and secrets collide. Your choices will echo far beyond these walls." The stranger nodded, aware of the weight of her words. He had survived ambushes, manipulated allies, and navigated smoke-filled conspiracies. Yet the convergence of power, vengeance, and revelation in this courtyard presented a new challenge, a test not just of skill, but of judgment, perception, and resilience. From the shadows the betrayer emerged, their expression both familiar and chilling. The pipe, the symbol of revelation and manipulation, glinted faintly in their hand. "You've come far," they said, voice calm, controlled. "But now all secrets must surface. The smoke will reveal what you cannot hide, and steel will determine who endures." The stranger's pulse quickened. The betrayer had orchestrated events with precision, their web extending into every alley, lounge, and political corridor. Tonight, the culmination of months of intrigue would unfold. He realized that survival required a combination of all he had learned. The courtesan network, Layla's guidance, the lessons from alleys and smoke, and the subtle manipulations of perception. A subtle signal from Layla indicated the movement of a hidden operative behind a tapestry. The stranger understood immediately. The confrontation was not linear. Allies and enemies were intertwined, motivations obscured, and every action would have cascading consequences. The courtyard became a chessboard, each participant a piece, each gesture move in a deadly game of strategy. The betrayer inhaled from the pipe, exhaling a cloud that shimmered in the lantern light. The smoke twisted, revealing hidden symbols, coded signals, and the faint outlines of observers, agents positioned to exploit any hesitation or misstep. The stranger inhaled sharply, recognizing that this was both literal and metaphorical. Clarity amidst confusion would determine survival. Steel flashed suddenly, a strike aimed at the stranger. He dodged instinctively, rolling to the side, drawing a secondary blade from his cloak arm. The first clash was swift, precise, and calculated. The courtyard erupted into motion, a blur of smoke, steel, and subtle signaling. Each opponent moved with lethal efficiency, yet every step and glance was part of a larger game. Layla intervened with elegance and force, her movements a combination of grace, precision, and lethal intent. Courtesan-trained strikes, honed over years, disrupted the momentum of the merchant's agents, creating openings for the stranger to exploit. Together, they moved like a single entity, steel and strategy, perception and instinct intertwined. From the shadows, a signal, a hidden operative lunged with a blade, but the stranger anticipated the move, intercepting with precise timing. The clash echoed through the courtyard, steel against steel, as the smoke thickened, curling like an unseen predator. Every move revealed layers of the conspiracy, hints of alliances, and glimpses of betrayal. The betrayer's voice rang out calm and taunting. "Do you see now? Every ally, every friend, every choice you make is observed, calculated, and manipulated. The game is larger than alleys, lounges, or even the Sultan's shadow. The currents flow deeper, and only those who perceive them fully can survive." The stranger's mind raced. He had navigated deception, mastered subtle cues, and survived ambushes. But now the stakes demanded not just reaction, but foresight. He engaged the betrayer directly, parrying a strike while simultaneously exploiting a subtle opening in their stance. Steel met steel, sparks flying as the fight intensified, each motion a balance between offense, defense, and strategic positioning. Smoke thickened around them. the courtyard a haze of shifting shadows. Observers shifted silently, ready to intervene, but the stranger realized that their advantage lay not just in numbers, but in perception. Every twitch, every hesitation, every movement could be exploited. He drew upon everything Layla had taught him, the subtleties of alliance, the cues of deception, and the patterns of power flowing through the city. Suddenly, an unexpected ally emerged, a figure once presumed neutral, now siding with the stranger. Their intervention created a critical opening, allowing him to disarm one of the merchant's agents and turn the tide in a narrow but decisive maneuver. The courtyard erupted in controlled chaos, a dance of smoke, steel, and strategic calculation. The betrayer staggered, surprised at the counterplay. The stranger pressed forward, using both blade and insight, anticipating reactions and manipulating perceptions. Every strike, every defensive maneuver, every subtle signal reinforced his growing mastery of the intertwined webs of influence, betrayal, and survival. At the height of the confrontation, the betrayer faltered, revealing a critical vulnerability. The stranger exploited it, forcing a moment of clarity amidst the haze. The smoke swirled, the steel clashed, and in that instant, the balance of power shifted. The courtyard, once a stage of uncertainty, now reflected the stranger's emerging command over both perception and action. Layla's eyes met his across the chaos, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. They had survived the first wave, gained insight into the depths of betrayal, and turned the confrontation into an opportunity. But the network was vast. The Sultan's shadow extended further than any courtyard, and the currents of Cairo's intrigue were far from settled. As the smoke began to clear, the stranger understood a fundamental truth. In this city of alleys, lounges, and shadows, survival depended not only on steel and cunning, but on the mastery of secrets, perception, and strategic foresight. Tonight's battle was won, but the war and the pursuit of revenge, truth, and influence had only just begun. The lanterns in the lounge flickered as if signalling the approach of destiny itself. Smoke hung thickly in the air, curling like living tendrils, and the usual hum of clandestine conversations was replaced by an eerie silence. The stranger stepped cautiously, acutely aware that tonight the merchant's true nature would finally come to light. He had traversed alleys, survived ambushes, navigated the Sultan's shadow, and endured betrayals. Yet this, he sensed, would be a revelation of unparalleled magnitude. The Merchant of Dreams had always been an enigma, part businessman, part manipulator, part shadow that lingered just beyond perception. But beneath the carefully maintained facade lay a force that controlled not just the lounges and courtesans, but entire networks that shaped Cairo's very heart. A low hum of whispered voices reached him, drawing his attention to a secluded chamber at the back of the lounge. The doors, carved with intricate symbols, bore the unmistakable seal of the merchant. As he pushed the doors open, the room's interior revealed an array of maps, letters, coded messages, and subtle signals of a network that was far larger and more organized than he had imagined. The merchant himself stood at the center, tall and composed, his eyes reflecting the flickering lantern light. "You've come far," he said, voice smooth, almost hypnotic. "You've seen the alleys, courtesans, betrayals, and even the Sultan's shadow. But none of it compares to the truth of what I oversee." The stranger's eyes scanned the chamber. Every corner, every artifact, every document was a node in an intricate web of influence. Courtesans, lounge networks, political courtiers, and even street-level informants were all connected through the merchant's subtle orchestration. The sheer scope of his control was staggering, a network designed not merely for profit or indulgence, but for influence, leverage, and the shaping of Cairo's destinies. "You see," the merchant continued, gesturing to a map of the city overlaid with coded symbols, "these lounges are more than places of indulgence. They are observation posts, meeting points, and instruments of control. Each whisper, each secret, each subtle gesture, carefully recorded, interpreted, and acted upon." The stranger's mind raced. He had navigated parts of this network before, smoke-filled rooms, alleys, subtle betrayals, but the full scale was now visible. It was not chaos, it was a meticulously designed machine, each participant unaware of the greater purpose, and at the center of it all, the Merchant of Dreams wielded influence that extended even into the Sultan's court. Layla stepped forward, her eyes sharp, reflecting both admiration and wariness. "It is larger than we imagined," she whispered. "We've seen parts of it, the betrayals, The alleys, the conspiracies, but the merchant's vision. It is total, almost impossible to counter. The merchant's expression softened momentarily, almost paternal, yet there was a coldness in his eyes. "You've survived observed and acted with skill," he said, "but understanding the network requires more than action. It requires comprehension. You must see the flows of information, the currents of influence, and the subtleties of human desire and fear. Only then can you grasp the true power of the merchant of dreams." He moved to a cabinet, pulling out a series of letters and coded messages. "These," he said, spreading them across the table, "are the threads of control." Courtesans relay secrets from their clients, merchants pass coded signals, informants report subtle movements within the Sultan's court. Every action is observed, every reaction anticipated. The stranger examined the documents, realizing that every alley confrontation, every smoke-filled lounge encounter, and even the betrayals he had survived, were orchestrated or at least foreseen by this network. It was a web of influence so deep that individual actions were merely ripples, almost predetermined in their effect on the broader currents of power. The merchant's eyes locked on him. "You understand now, don't you? The alleys, the smoke, the steel, they are tools. The true weapon is information. Knowledge, manipulation, and perception are what shape this city. Everything else is secondary." A subtle movement in the shadows drew the stranger's attention. Agents of the merchant's inner circle, previously unseen, now revealed themselves, observers, operatives, and couriers, each a living extension of the network. The courtyard outside, the lounges, even the Sultan's shadow. The merchant's influence reached further than he had imagined. Layla stepped beside him, whispering, "Every step you've taken, every decision you've made, has been within the scope of this network. And yet, the merchant watches, not only for control but for opportunity. He shapes events, yes, but also tests those he deems worthy or dangerous." The stranger realized the implications. Survival alone was no longer sufficient. Understanding, manipulation, and strategic alignment were essential. The network was a living organism, and he had only begun to comprehend its intricacies. The merchant moved again, revealing a hidden compartment containing a series of sealed letters and encrypted messages intended for agents throughout the city. "These letters," he said, "carry directives, guidance, and influence. They ensure that every node in the network functions as intended. Courtesans, merchants, informants, all play their part, often unaware of the larger picture." The stranger's mind processed the enormity of it all. The merchant's network was not merely about power, money, or indulgence. It was a mechanism for shaping perception, manipulating outcomes, and orchestrating events on a scale that extended from alleys to the Sultan's court. Every previous encounter, every betrayal, every secret letter had been a lesson, a test, a preparation for understanding this deeper reality. The merchant's gaze was unwavering. "And now you see, the true game is not fought with steel or smoke alone. It is fought with foresight, perception, and influence. The alliances you've formed, the betrayals you've endured, they are pieces in a larger puzzle. And now you must decide, will you navigate this network as an observer, a participant, or a challenger?" The stranger felt the weight of the decision pressing down. He had survived the alleys, endured betrayals, and learned to anticipate the movements of the Sultan's shadow. But the merchant's revelation expanded the battlefield infinitely. Cairo itself became a chessboard, and every player, every whisper, every glance was a potential move in a game far larger than any he had previously imagined. Layla's hand brushed his arm, a silent reminder that allies' perception and intuition were as critical as any weapon. "We must choose carefully," she said. "The merchant's network is vast, but even vast empires have vulnerabilities. Understanding them is the first step toward mastery and survival." As the lanterns flickered and smoke curled through the lounge, the stranger realized that the journey ahead was no longer just about alleys, courtesans, or betrayals. It was about comprehending the merchant's vision, navigating the intricacies of influence, and confronting a network that shaped Cairo's destiny in ways that few could perceive and even fewer could challenge. The merchant of dreams stood at the center, calm, commanding, and almost omnipotent in his presence. The stranger understood one undeniable truth. To survive, influence, and perhaps even alter the course of events, he would need to master the web entirely, its secrets, currents, and the subtle interplay of power that the merchant had so meticulously orchestrated. The air in the lounge was heavy with the scent of incense and the faint tang of smoke, curling languidly like memories long held in secret. Layla moved quietly, her fingers brushing over the polished surface of a table where coded letters and subtle signals had been left. She paused, letting her gaze linger on the papers, but it was not the information that occupied her mind. It was the weight of choice. Months of alliances, betrayals, and whispered secrets had brought her here, to the threshold of a decision that could change the balance of power in Cairo's hidden networks. The stranger, who had proven himself time and again in alleys, lounges, and confrontations with the betrayer, watched her from across the room. He understood the tension in her posture, the conflicted pull between loyalty and ambition, trust and survival. "Layla," he said softly, stepping closer, careful not to startle her. "Whatever you decide, I will stand by it." She turned, eyes locking with his, a mixture of warmth, defiance and uncertainty. "It's not that simple," she whispered. "Every choice here, it has consequences far beyond our control. Trust is fragile, alliances shift and betrayal waits in every corner." The lounge seemed to breathe around them, smoke curling in intricate patterns, as if reflecting the tangled web of relationships and secrets she had navigated. Layla's thoughts drifted to the merchant of dreams, whose network stretched into the Sultan's court and beyond. Every move she had made, every whisper she had conveyed, every secret she had kept, had been a delicate balance between serving him and preserving her own autonomy. Her mind replayed recent events, the betrayer's revelation, the confrontations in the alleys, the subtle manipulations of the courtesan network, and the ever-present shadow of the Sultan's influence. Each thread had tested her loyalty, judgment, and courage. Now, the ultimate decision rested in her hands, a choice that would define not only her future, but that of the stranger and the network itself. The stranger watched her carefully, understanding that her choice would impact more than personal allegiance. It could shift the dynamics of power across the city. "You've always known the risks," he said. "But now you must decide whether to act, to reveal, or to protect." Layla closed her eyes, taking a slow breath. Her thoughts returned to the courtesans whose lives she had guided, the alleys she had navigated in secret, and the countless whispers she had transmitted. Each had been a thread in the intricate tapestry of influence, and each had required careful judgment. One wrong move, one misjudged trust, and the consequences could ripple across Cairo's hidden corridors, touching lives she had sworn to protect. Opening her eyes, she looked at the stranger, her expression a blend of determination and vulnerability. "I have to choose carefully," she said. "The merchant's vision is vast, and we are only pieces in his game. But loyalty, trust, and survival, they are not always aligned. Sometimes, to preserve one, you must sacrifice another." The stranger reached out, placing a steady hand on hers. "Whatever path you take, know that I trust your judgment. You've guided me, protected me, and helped me survive. And now it's your turn to decide how far you will go, and at what cost." Layla nodded, the weight of responsibility pressing down. Her choice was not simple: to remain loyal to the merchant, to challenge him, or to strike a balance that could either preserve her position or destroy it entirely. Each option carried risks, rewards, and the potential for betrayal, intentional or otherwise. She moved toward a hidden cabinet, opening it to reveal letters, documents, and coded messages that could alter the balance of power in the network. Her fingers hovered over them, weighing each carefully. To act prematurely could expose her intentions. To hesitate could allow enemies to exploit the moment. The decision required clarity, courage, and foresight. The stranger observed her, silent and vigilant, knowing that whatever she chose would impact not only their immediate situation, but the wider dynamics of Cairo's hidden corridors, lounges, and political undercurrents. Trust had been tested before, and betrayal had been encountered in many forms, but the stakes now were unprecedented. Layla's gaze shifted to a document detailing the merchant's directives and network operations. She understood, in that instant, that her choice was not just about allegiance. It was about shaping outcomes, guiding influence, and determining who would thrive and who would fall in the intricate web of control. A sudden sound from the corridor, outside the lounge, made them both tense. An informant, a spy, or an agent of the Sultan could be approaching at any moment. Every movement, every decision was subject to observation, and the wrong choice could trigger consequences that extended far beyond their immediate environment. A time is short, the stranger said softly. Every moment we wait, the network shifts. Allies may change sides, enemies may gain advantage. You must decide. Layla inhaled slowly, centering herself amid the swirling smoke and tension. Her decision would not be easy, but she understood that in a city built on perception, influence, and secrecy, hesitation was itself a choice, and sometimes a fatal one. She reached for a sealed letter, one that contained directives capable of reshaping allegiances within the merchants' network. As her fingers touched the seal, she realized the implications. Revealing its contents to the stranger could forge trust and alignment, but it could also mark her as a traitor in the merchant's eyes. Keeping it secret might preserve her position, but risk losing an ally she had come to rely upon. The lounge seemed to grow still, the smoke curling like silent witnesses to her internal struggle. Every breath, every heartbeat was measured against the stakes she faced. She knew that her choice would define not only her relationship with the stranger, but the fate of the intricate network of influence and power that enveloped Cairo. Finally, Wither made her decision. Her hand moved deliberately, revealing the contents of the letter to the stranger. His eyes scanned the information, understanding immediately the magnitude of what she had chosen to share. Trust had been extended, and with it came both opportunity and vulnerability. The merchant of dreams, the betrayer, the courtesans and the Sultan's shadow, all were now part of a larger, shifting landscape that required careful navigation, constant vigilance, and strategic action. Layla's choice had not ended the uncertainty, but it had altered the balance, opening a path toward alignment, confrontation, and the pursuit of survival amid the swirling smoke and hidden threats of the city. The stranger met her gaze, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. Loyalty, trust, and courage had combined to produce a decision that would resonate through the alleys, lounges, and corridors of influence. Yet the road ahead remained perilous. Betrayal could strike at any moment, and the threads of power and perception were more intricate than ever. As smoke filled the lounge, curling around lanterns and shadows, Layla and the stranger understood a fundamental truth. In a city governed by secrecy, manipulation, and hidden influence, every choice carried weight, every trust was tested, and every betrayal left a mark. Her choice had set in motion a series of events that could shift allegiances, redefine power, and determine who would survive in the sprawling, shadowed world of Cairo's hidden corridors. And as the night deepened, both of them knew that the game was far from over, yet, for the first time, they had a measure of clarity amid the chaos, a fragile trust to guide them through the smoke, secrets, and steel that defined their world. The city held its breath that night. Cairo's alleys, lounges, and hidden chambers seemed to pulse with anticipation, as if every shadow, every whisper, and every flicker of lantern light knew that the culmination of months of plotting, betrayal, and strategy was at hand. The stranger moved with deliberate caution, senses heightened, aware that tonight every choice would carry irreversible consequences. Layla walked beside him, her hand barely brushing his, a silent acknowledgement of trust, alliance, and shared purpose. They had survived ambushes, navigated betrayal, and unravelled secrets that few even suspected existed. But tonight, everything converged. The merchant of dreams, the betrayer, the Sultan's shadow, and the countless threads of influence they had navigated would intersect in a single decisive moment. Ahead, in a secluded courtyard, shrouded in smoke and lantern light, figures were already gathering. Courtesans, agents, spies, and operatives, all drawn to a meeting whose purpose was as dangerous as it was clandestine. The stranger observed them carefully, recognizing patterns, alliances, and subtle tensions. Every glance, every gesture, every whispered word was a move on a complex, invisible chessboard. The merchant of dreams appeared first, calm, composed, his presence commanding the attention of all assembled. The stranger understood immediately. The merchant had orchestrated this convergence, ensuring that every player, ally, and adversary would be present, visible, and vulnerable. The stakes were no longer personal. They were structural, affecting the balance of power in Cairo itself. From the shadows, the betrayer emerged, exuding quiet menace. The pipe was clenched in their hand, a symbol of manipulation, insight, and revelation. Their eyes scanned the gathering, calculating, predicting, probing for weaknesses. The stranger's pulse quickened. Every betrayal, every hidden agenda, every previous confrontation had been a preparation for this very moment. Layla's eyes met his, reflecting determination, fear, and resolve. "We must act carefully," she whispered, "but decisively. Every second counts. Counts." The courtyard's tension snapped when a subtle signal passed among the gathered figures, a prearranged cue that triggered the first moves in a deadly dance of steel, deception, and strategy. Courtesans began to whisper coded messages. Operatives subtly shifted positions, spies readied hidden weapons, and every observer waited for the signal that would initiate chaos. The stranger and Layla moved as one, slipping between shadows, reading the currents of influence, anticipation, and betrayal. The first clash came swiftly. A merchant agent lunged, blade flashing, only to be intercepted by the stranger with precise timing. Steel rang against steel, sparks lighting the smoke-filled air as the courtyard erupted into motion. Every strike, every parry, every subtle gesture was not merely combat, it was strategy. Allies could become threats in a moment, enemies could be turned with a calculated move. The betrayer advanced, using smoke and perception to manipulate the battlefield, testing both stranger and Layla, probing for hesitation or miscalculation. The merchant observed calmly, orchestrating events like a conductor guiding an unseen symphony. Courtesans delivered whispers of intelligence, agents intercepted messages, and the Sultan's shadow lingered in subtle signals and strategic positioning. The stranger realized the battle was as much about perception and control as it was about physical confrontation. Amid the chaos, Layla executed a series of precise moves, neutralizing multiple threats while signaling the stranger toward a critical position. Together, they turned the tide in several micro-confrontations, exploiting openings that only their shared experience and intuition allowed them to see. A sudden ambush from a hidden corridor challenged the stranger. The betrayer had anticipated the move, seeking to divide and overwhelm, but he countered with a combination of agility, perception, and cunning. Every strike and movement was layered with calculated foresight, a testament to the months of experience, betrayals, and lessons learned. The courtyard became a blur of smoke, steel, and shifting alliances. Courtesans manipulated perceptions, whispering half-truths that redirected opponents. Agents engaged in rapid, silent skirmishes, and the merchant subtly adjusted his directives, maintaining the advantage. Even the Sultan's shadow, loyal spies and intermediaries, played their hand, adding layers of complexity and unpredictability. Suddenly, the betrayer confronted Layla directly, pipe in hand, their expression a mixture of malice and challenge. The stranger intervened, their movements synchronized, a deadly triad of strategy, skill, and instinct. Steel met steel, smoke obscured vision, and every gesture was a test of resolve and understanding. The confrontation reached a crescendo when the stranger identified a hidden vulnerability in the merchant's orchestrated layout. Signals that had seemed secure revealed subtle inconsistencies, an opening that could allow them to seize control of the battlefield, expose the betrayer, and shift the balance of power. With coordinated precision, the stranger and Layla exploited the opening. The betrayer's plans were disrupted, agents were neutralized, and critical information flowed into their hands. The merchant, observing, allowed a faint smile, part approval, part challenge. He understood that this confrontation was not merely a test of loyalty or skill, but a demonstration of mastery over perception, strategy, and action. Amid the chaos, revelations unfolded. Secret alliances betrayed, hidden motivations exposed, and the true scope of the network laid bare. Courtesans revealed intelligence previously withheld. Operatives shifted allegiances, and the stranger realized that trust, betrayal, and influence were all instruments in the same symphony of power. As the smoke thinned, the courtyard settled into tense stillness. The merchant's presence dominated, the betrayer had retreated, and the stranger and Layla stood at the center of a new balance, one forged through steel, perception, and decisive action. The network was neither destroyed nor fully controlled. Rather, it had been reshaped, its currents redirected, its players realigned. Layla's hand found the stranger's, a silent acknowledgement of victory, survival, and mutual reliance. Yet beneath the triumph lay the recognition that Cairo's hidden world remained a labyrinth of intrigue, influence, and danger. Every choice had consequences, every alliance was tentative, and every betrayal could resurface. The stranger's eyes scanned the courtyard, taking in the aftermath. Courtesans whispered among themselves, agents regrouped, and the merchant maintained his composed demeanor, a reminder that even in apparent resolution, power remained fluid. The final confrontation had concluded, but the battle for control, influence, and survival continued, an unending game in which smoke, secrets, and steel remained constant companions. And in that moment, amidst the lingering smoke and shadows, both the stranger and Layla understood the immutable truth. Victory in Cairo's hidden corridors was never absolute, trust was always fragile, and every confrontation was but a prelude to the next challenge. The dawn in Cairo broke with an almost deceptive calm, a soft haze settling over the alleys and rooftops, as if the city itself exhaled after the chaos of the previous night. The smoke had cleared from the lounges and courtyards, but its memory lingered, a ghost of whispers, betrayals, and secrets that refused to dissipate. The stranger walked alongside Layla, moving through streets that felt simultaneously familiar and transformed. The confrontations, revelations, and near-deadly encounters of the night before had reshaped not only their understanding of the city, but the network of power and influence that controlled it. Courtesans, operatives, and agents had returned to their routines, but the subtle tremors of what had occurred spread silently through every shadowed corner. Layla's expression was unreadable, a mixture of reflection, resolve, and the faint trace of weariness. "It's done," she said softly, though the words felt insufficient to capture the scope of what had transpired. The confrontations, the betrayals. "Yet I feel like the city itself has shifted beneath our feet." The stranger nodded, sensing the truth in her words. They had survived, navigated the merchant's network, and confronted the betrayer. But survival was only the first step. The aftermath was a landscape of uncertainty, where trust and deception, power and influence were in constant flux. Every choice they had made rippled outward, affecting alliances, perceptions, and the future of Cairo's hidden corridors. As they moved toward a quieter section of the city, they observed subtle changes, courtesans exchanging glances with unspoken understanding, informants subtly shifting positions, and previously loyal agents reconsidering their allegiances. The Merchant of Dreams had maintained his presence, his influence subtly realigned, ensuring that control remained intact, even as the immediate confrontation had concluded. "The network, it's still intact," the stranger said, voice low. "We've altered its currents, yes, but it continues to flow, adapt, and evolve. Every action we took last night has consequences we cannot yet fully see." Layla's eyes lingered on a distant alley where smoke still curled faintly in the morning light. "And yet there are cracks," she replied. Vita. The betrayer's influence has been diminished, some loyalties have shifted, and even the merchant must now account for what we've done. The city is watching, always watching, but now, perhaps, we've nudged the balance slightly towards something new. Their walk continued through the quiet streets, the city's heartbeat subtle beneath the soft clamour of early merchants and labourers. Cairo had returned to its rhythm, yet beneath the surface, subtle currents of power, observation, and manipulation pulsed invisibly. Every shadow, every whispered conversation carried the memory of the night before and the latent potential for future intrigue. Layla paused at a small fountain in a secluded courtyard, its water reflecting the soft light of morning. She touched the surface, disturbing the reflection, and seemed to contemplate the ripples that spread outward. "The choices we made," she murmured, "are like these ripples. They move through the city, unseen by most, yet affecting everything in ways few could predict." The stranger considered her words. The network, the merchant, the betrayer, and even the Sultan's shadow, all were elements of a delicate ecosystem, and their actions had introduced new variables. The courtesans they had relied upon, the operatives they had maneuvered, and the subtle manipulations they had executed now carried weight far beyond immediate survival. Every ripple of influence, every realigned allegiance would shape the city's hidden world for months, perhaps years. Yet despite the weight of consequence, there was also clarity. The stranger had learned that survival required not just steel or cunning, but comprehension of the intricate web of power, perception, and influence. Layla had shown that trust could be wielded as effectively as any weapon, and that choice carried both risk and opportunity. Together, they had confronted chaos and emerged with insight, if not certainty. A faint movement in the courtyard drew their attention. A courtesan, previously aligned with the merchant's inner circle, approached with a coded message, a subtle acknowledgement of their altered status within the network. The message was brief but significant, confirmation that new alliances were forming, that the currents of influence were shifting, and that opportunities for both strategic action and survival had expanded. The city itself is changing, the stranger observed. And not the streets, not the buildings, but the undercurrents, the alliances, the unspoken rules that govern everything. What we've done has altered those currents. Layla's gaze hardened slightly, determination and foresight interwoven. And yet, there are still secrets, she said. Even now, the merchant watches. The Sultan's shadow lingers, and somewhere the betrayer nurses grievances, waiting for opportunity. We've acted, we've influenced, but the game is far from over. They moved on, passing through the alleys and rooftops where the city's heart beat in rhythm with smoke, whispers and silent observation. Each encounter, each decision had left traces, subtle yet permanent. They were marked now, not just as survivors but as active participants in a network of power and secrecy that extended far beyond their immediate perception. As the morning light deepened, the stranger reflected on the lessons learned. Perception was as powerful as steel, trust was a currency more valuable than gold, and every betrayal, every secret, was both a weapon and a test. The city itself was a living entity, shaped by the ambitions, choices and manipulations of those who understood its hidden structures. Layla turned toward him, her expression resolute yet tinged with quiet reflection. "Oh, I've reached the end of this chapter," she said, "but not the end of the story." The city will continue to whisper, to shift, to challenge. We've gained insight, forged alliances and altered the currents, but the hidden corridors of Cairo are eternal. Smoke, secrets and steel endure beyond any one night, any single confrontation. The stranger nodded, understanding the depth of her words. Cairo's veil was thin but persistent, hiding layers of influence, perception, and concealed agendas. They had navigated betrayal, confronted power, and survived confrontation, but the city, with all its intricacies, remained a challenge, a puzzle, and a test of insight, courage, and strategic foresight. In that moment, standing together amid the soft morning light and lingering smoke, they recognized the balance they had achieved. Temporary clarity amid uncertainty, trust forged through shared peril, and influence gained through careful action. The network was neither conquered nor controlled completely, but its currents now acknowledged their presence, their insight, and their capability. The city around them began to stir with life, merchants opening stalls, courtesans attending to their routines, and whispers weaving unseen through alleys. Cairo's veil had not lifted entirely, it never would, but the stranger and Layla had stepped onto a path of understanding, survival, and subtle mastery. Every secret revealed, every choice made, every action executed had set the stage for a future in which influence, trust and perception would continue to define the hidden world beneath the city's surface. And as they moved into the heart of the waking city, they knew this truth above all. In Cairo, beneath the veil of smoke and shadows, the dance of secrets, strategy and survival never ended. It simply evolved, awaiting the next choice, the next betrayal, and the next opportunity to shape destiny. The sun had long set over Cairo, leaving the city draped in a cloak of twilight. Lanterns glimmered faintly along alleys, rooftops, and hidden courtyards, casting elongated shadows that danced and shifted like memories of the night's secrets. The city exhaled a quiet, deliberate breath, and yet beneath that calm lay currents of intrigue, subtle as smoke and just as pervasive. The stranger stood on a rooftop overlooking the river, the faint glimmer of moonlight reflecting off the water's surface. Beside him, Layla remained silent, her eyes tracing the winding alleys below, aware of the hidden observers, whispered communications, and the network that had shaped their recent lives. The city felt both familiar and unknowable, alive with secrets that would endure long after any single confrontation or revelation. They had survived betrayal, navigated the merchant's intricate web, and confronted the betrayer's manipulations. They had learned that in Cairo, perception often outweighed action, whispers could carry more weight than steel, and trust was both fragile and invaluable. And yet, even with these hard-won lessons, they understood that the city's secrets were endless, layered, and ever-evolving. "Or do you ever wonder," the stranger asked softly, "if any of it is truly finished?" Layla's gaze did not leave the alleys. "Finished? No," she replied, a faint smile tugging at the corner of her lips. "Ichiro has a way of keeping its stories alive. Every choice we've made, every alliance, every betrayal, it only ripples outward. Smoke may clear, but the scent lingers. Shadows may shift, but they never vanish." The distant sound of a merchant closing a stall, a courtesan's soft laughter, and the faint clatter of footsteps in a quiet alley reminded them of the city's heartbeat, a rhythm that continued regardless of individual deeds. They had played their part, navigated the intrigue, and survived. No. But the true game of influence, perception, and subtle power would endure, invisible yet undeniable. The stranger allowed himself a moment of reflection. The journey had been perilous. Confrontations, near-deaths, secret letters, whispered betrayals, and the constant tension of navigating a network that spanned the city. And yet, there had been victories, alliances forged in trust, insights gained through observation, and a clearer understanding of the forces that shaped Cairo's hidden corridors. Layla turned to him, her expression resolute, almost serene. "We've influenced events," she said. "We've survived the tests, and we've reshaped currents of power in ways that matter. But the city is eternal. Its networks, its whispers, its secrets, they persist, just as smoke lingers in a room long after the fire has died." He nodded. "And we've learned something invaluable. That influence is never absolute, trust is a rare currency, and even victory carries the weight of uncertainty." Above them, the moon rose higher, illuminating the rooftops and casting long, deliberate shadows across the alleys below. The faint glimmer of lanterns, the smoke curling from hidden chimneys, and the distant murmurs of Cairo's residents all seemed to affirm the epilogue of their journey. Not an ending, but a continuation, a subtle pause in a story that would stretch beyond what they could see. The stranger exhaled slowly, letting the weight of experience settle. Every encounter, every betrayal, every revelation had led to this point. They had learned that courage and perception were as critical as action, that alliances and trust were fragile yet indispensable, and that understanding the currents of influence could be as potent as wielding any weapon. Layla's gaze returned to the river, where the moonlight danced on the rippling surface. "We've played our hand," she murmured. "But Cairo always holds new games, new choices, new shadows. The dance of smoke and intrigue is unending. And we've survived enough to navigate it, at least for now." The stranger allowed himself a small wry smile. "For now," he echoed. The words carried both relief and awareness, the understanding that their story had reached a moment of closure, but that the city's hidden corridors would continue to challenge, tempt, and shape those who dared to navigate them. Together, they turned away from the river, moving through the alleys where shadows played, smoke curled, and whispers lingered. The city's heartbeat pulsed beneath their feet, reminding them that life, secrecy, and influence were eternal, layered, and perpetually in motion. They had survived, they had learned, and they had influenced events, but the delicate web of Cairo's intrigue stretched infinitely beyond them, ready to ensnare, challenge, or reward those who stepped into its labyrinthine paths. And so, beneath the veil of smoke and shadows, the city exhaled and resumed its rhythm. The merchant of dreams remained a subtle presence, the betrayer's influence was diminished but not erased, and Layla and the stranger had found their place within the currents of power, trust, and perception. The story, though concluded for them, persisted in every alley, every lounge, every whispered secret, a city alive with intrigue, a web of influence that demanded vigilance, and a reminder that in Cairo, smoke and shadows always persist.